Someone make it make sense.
Probably a couple.
Hello, hello, hello. Wherever you are, squirrel friends, welcome. I know that the plan for tonight was to do Katie McBanawaz's proffers. We are going to do them. I have them scheduled. I just had to move them up because, as always happens, as I am wont to do, when I was doing timestamps for this live stream from last night with the Karen Reed, the Daubert hearing with Dr. Russell, and there's the mention of Kenny Kinsey. It dawned on me like a light bulb. I was like, oh my God, what perfect thing to do. What would be better than after having just watched this Daubert hearing and hearing about, what the standard is and what the rules are in Massachusetts and all this and that. And what better thing to do than to watch Kenny Kinsey himself, right? Testify. And this is where it's like the world's colliding because y'all, if you didn't watch Murdaugh or you didn't watch the entire trial and you didn't see this, and even if you did, it's really going to be crazy to go from one to the other and try to picture and imagine what this will be like to have Kenny Kinsey testify here in this court, being called, I'm sure, under direct examination from Hank Brennan. And, he'll be crossed by either Mr. Yannetti or Mr. Jackson or Mr. Alessi. It's going to be probably a bit of a culture shock, I would think, maybe for some of the people in the courtroom, for maybe some of the jurors. But so it's an amazing, again, like a collision of the worlds, right? And the juxtaposition of the different cultures is really going to be interesting as well. But also, Dr. Kinsey is far and away like my favorite expert witness of all time. And he's so qualified. But the question we're going to have to ask ourselves is, we're going to get to see all of his qualifications. We're going to get to hear all of that, right? And is this going to be what is needed, right? If this is the expert that they intend to offer to try to be the counter to Dr. Russell, right? Is this who, or are they going to have someone else? But the thing is that, and we're going to review this part too, like he kept asking, as y'all heard over and over again, Dr. Russell, about being a crime scene reconstructionist or an accident. And it's like, she's not that, right? And so it's like all that is leading up to him naming who the replacement is, who's Trooper Paul's replacement, and it's Dr. Kinsey. Now, there is literally no better, again, accident reconstructionist on the planet, in my view. But again, is this going to be what is needed? Are those equal? Is this comparing apples to oranges, right? Kenny was being quoted from Brandy. I don't know what you're referencing there, ABC's docket, but welcome. But we're going to watch the part where he references Kenny Kinsey. So I have that queued up and ready to go. This is from the live stream from last night.
I have at least as much experience.
The shitty thing is that I would say that's probably accurate, but she can't say that.
As any other possible person in the country. And I have it from both aspects, from the clinical aspect and from the forensic aspect.
Yeah.
Did you review the opinion of Dr. Kenneth Kinsey, who said that those injuries were not caused
Here
by
it is. I died. Y'all. Oh my God. I couldn't believe it. I was like, hold on. Wait a second. My freaking hero from the Murdaugh trial. Are they going to bring him in?
As any other possible person in the country. And I have it from both aspects, from the clinical aspect and from the forensic aspect.
Did you review the opinion of Dr. Kenneth Kinsey, who said that those injuries were not caused by a canine?
Dr. who?
Kenneth Kinsey.
The man, the myth, the legend.
No.
If you look, I believe Mr. O'Keefe's arm were completely bent when he sustained the injuries. A lot of them match up. They're a continuation of another injury.
And I don't even know who Dr. Kinsey is.
Okay.
Is that a medical doctor?
So you don't have any...
He doesn't answer that question. Now, here's why. Dr. Kinsey is not a medical doctor. Dr. Kinsey is a goat, like greatest of all time. He's awesome. But here's the thing. Just like he's been doing all along, where he being Hank Brennan, is asking questions that are in the realm of crime scene reconstructionists, right? And she's a medical doctor, right? Kenny Kinsey is a crime scene reconstructionist. Now, he is a gentleman and a scholar, and he will not get out over his skis, as they say in the low country of South Carolina. And he will not tread over things into the, like he won't answer things that are in the medical field. And he would say, I defer to the doctors, right? Like, he is a good freaking dude. And it sounds like the Commonwealth is going to be using him, and I will trust what he says. And he's a good dude for any of you guys who know that trial. So, okay, don't stop. Okay.
Can't review it all. You have nobody who's given an opinion similar to yours about this being dog bites, do you?
Is that
So reviewing the opinion. So, if indeed if you're referencing that was being quoted from, the thing is that he can't bring that up in a Daubert hearing, right? Like, what somebody says, in terms of an expert opinion, like, that wouldn't be relevant. I can't, that's just like commentary, right? On a YouTube channel. The way that he phrases that, right? Did you review the opinion? That is why it's indicating, right? We know that they are going to be replacing Trooper Paul, and they had not named yet who that was. But right here, this is where he references Dr. Kenny Kinsey. So that is what we have. And then the other thing I was going to go to is the part about the medical doctor. So let me find that part here. It's like coming right up.
To the assertions of an attorney. That is the greatest danger to a defendant being able to present their case in their view. Remarkably, all of the arguments you just heard now do not come from a medical doctor, which Your Honor has said causation of an injury to a person in Massachusetts must come from a medical doctor. Where is the affidavit? Where is the...
That's actually really important, right? Causation must come from a medical doctor. So you know what that means? It can't come from a crime scene expert, even if they're a crime scene expert, right? Like a Kenny Kinsey, as awesome as he is, right? Medical doctor.
Report of a prosecution witness to support one statement Mr. Brennan just made in 30 minutes. Where is it? It doesn't
So the
exist.
key factor there, right?
I would like to...
Again, like, if they're going to offer Kenny Kinsey or anyone else, any accident reconstruction specialist, as like the counter to Dr. Russell, the thing is they cannot opine on causation of the injury, because Judge Bev has already ruled that causation has to come from a medical doctor. So that's really the thing there, right? Causation has to come from a medical doctor. So they would have to find another medical doctor. I don't know where they would find one, but they would have to find another medical doctor similar to a Dr. Russell that has all this experience with dog bites and is a medical doctor. So, yeah. So hi, Top Cat, glad you're here. I think that Brennan means is Kinsey can prove that the car, which cancels out Brennan. Cancels out Brennan. You mean Mr. Alessi, or you mean Dr. Russell? Right. So again, so in terms of proving what caused an injury, right? So for anyone who's going to prove that, whether it's car or dog, right? Like, for example, when thinking about like proving the car caused the injury, right? If someone's is not a medical doctor, the way that they would have to do that is to prove the mechanics of the car. Like when we heard the ARCA dudes testify and they said it wasn't a car, it would be like that, but someone could say it was a car. So they explain the physics of the car, right? But again, they would have to stay away from the injury itself, but more like the aspects of the car. Oh, you meant Russell. Okay. Yeah. So, yeah, again, so in terms of proving, again, it couldn't be that in terms of proving the car caused the arm injury, it couldn't be because of the injury. It would have to be because of the car, if that makes sense. But that is a good segue into Dr. Kenny Kinsey. And we are going to see all of his wonderful qualifications. Yeah, Yeah. And again, we have not heard anything about a dog bite expert. And the thing is like the Commonwealth has even said it's not a thing that exists, right? The Commonwealth has said that this is a field that doesn't exist. And whether they said that or not, like I was just saying, I think you'd have a hard time finding someone who is a medical doctor and an expert on dog bites because it's such a rare niche thing, right? That's what makes her so special. And again, the other thing too is we would see, if that was happening, we would see motions for another Daubert hearing, and they're getting close on time, right? The trial is scheduled for April 1st. So I would think that if they are bringing in any expert, by they I mean the Commonwealth, that is going to necessitate a Daubert hearing, for example, another dog bite person, right? We would have to see something really soon about that because they're not going to have time, for that to happen before trial otherwise. But they didn't, even in this entire hearing, the Daubert hearings, plural, they never once indicated that they had a dog bite expert. They indicated Kenny Kinsey, accident reconstruction. They talked about having the mold for Chloe, which, who knows? That was a wild card. So yeah. But okay, so let me pull up. Now, here's the thing. For any of you guys who aren't familiar with Murdaugh trial, right? Maybe you didn't watch it or you watched part of it. That is okay. You are in the right place because I can answer any questions. I can explain everything. This is my favorite trial of all time. And it's not necessary for benefiting from watching this testimony from Kenny Kinsey. It is delightful. It is interesting. It is informative. It is this is going to be awesome. So we are going to watch Kenny Kinsey in action. All right. And yeah, he listed a what was it? Like, I think a forensic pathologist also. He had someone else take a look at like the autopsy, and I don't remember that person's name. But if anyone wants to provide me with any other names that were mentioned, that would be awesome. But there was nothing about dog bite. So, okay. So this is from day 17 of the trial. Let me make a banner. We should swoop. Let's swoop. And we're going to do, in honor of Murdaugh, we're going to do the Murdaugh Swoop. Where is it? Here we go.
It's a house.
Okay.
All right, good morning. Day number 19. State's case, cross-examination, Mr. Barber.
I need to go forward just a little bit. This dude's just on cross for a second. Doo-doo-doo. Yeah, see, because there's Kenny Kinsey. This dude has a very short cross.
Do you swear or affirm that any
There we go.
testimony you give today will be the
There
truth,
he is.
the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? If you would, please, sir, be
Awesome.
seated with the sheriff there. State your full name for the record, spell your last name, and try to talk in the mic as good as you can.
This is going to be really fun, especially for those of you in other countries, like Top Cat for you. This is the low country of South Carolina. So we've got some accents going on. Look at this chair in the witness box. For those, again, if you didn't watch the trial, this is going to be a real treat for you guys. There's some amazing moments in this as well. I'm so excited.
Dr. Kinsey, how you doing today?
Kenneth Lee Kinsey, Kinsey. I'm fine, sir.
Good. Dr. Kinsey, let's talk a little bit about your career and who you are. First of all, just kind of introduce yourself to the jury a little bit and tell them where you grew up and where you went to school, and then we'll start to talk about your law enforcement career and your expert qualifications.
Yes, sir, happily. I grew up a long way from here in a little county called Orangeburg. I was there about 54 years, my whole life. Went away for college a couple times and came back and I'm currently the Chief Deputy of the Orangeburg County Sheriff's Office, and I'm also a professor of criminal justice at Claflin University, where I teach crime scene related classes.
All right. And
Good God, are they best friends or something? Okay. In this trial, literally every witness, they start out with talk about where you grew up. Sometimes they talk about where they go to church. There's times where they go on these whole tangents about, remember when we saw you at the Gamecocks, football game? I mean, this is how it's done here. Okay. This is a very different type of, every jurisdiction and then every court, AKA judge, right, within jurisdictions, they have their own. It's a whole different animal, okay? And all of the Murdaugh-related cases and all of the trials, in fact, in the Low Country, South Carolina, tend to have this same very relaxed. Relaxed is an understatement, okay? There's a lot of normal rules that don't apply here. One example, the witness exclusionary rule. There isn't one. In fact, when witnesses get on the stand, oftentimes they are they're expected to have watched the entire trial so far. And they're like, you were here, you saw yesterday's witness, blah, blah. It's like, there's a lot of things, right? We'll point them out as we go along as other things come up, but they have their own way of doing things. And one of them is they're very, what's the right way to say it? Like informal, right? With like the witnesses. And it's also, this is a very small town. And we talked about this with the cell towers as well, right? But this is a very small area. Everybody knows each other. Alex Murdaugh, the defendant, right? They had to take down his grandpappy's portrait, which was hanging in the courtroom in order for this trial to take place, because the portrait was hanging there. And this family is infamous, right? The Murdaugh family. So, and look at the gallery packed, right? This was a huge deal. So, and of course, that's Creighton Waters. He's the prosecutor. He's my favorite prosecutor of all time. Freaking love him.
pull that mic a little bit closer to you. Let's first of all, before we get to the professorship and what led to that, let's talk about your law enforcement career. So walk me back to the beginning, and if you could just kind of walk through the various stages of your career and the things that you did along the way that led you to become the chief deputy for Orangeburg.
Yes, sir. I began my law enforcement career approximately 30 years ago, and I've held many positions in those 30 years. But for the last 22 years, my concentration, other than administration, has been crime scene investigations and working violent crime scenes.
One thing I will say too is imagine also, right? He is awesome. This dude's awesome, and he has all this law enforcement we're gonna hear. But I was just thinking in my mind, like, imagine if the defense, for example, asks him like, so what did you think about how the crime scene was handled in this case? I mean, when he learns about the solo cups, I hope they have a medic handy because he might have a heart attack.
I have ran the crime scene unit in Orangeburg for 6 or 7 years, and then I went on to SLED for approximately 4 years, and then I came back, and now I directly supervise the captain of investigations, and investigations includes the crime scene unit. So I'm still hands-on on crime scenes, either as a primary or a backup crime scene investigator. And as I mentioned earlier, I teach crime scene investigation and other criminal justice related courses. I received my bachelor's degree from Clemson University in 1991. My master's degree in science from Troy University in 2011, and my PhD from Walden University in 2019 with a concentration on use of force cases involving police officers. And my research is use of force and crime scene investigations.
So we could call you Dr. Kinsey, correct?
My grandmother told me it's what you answer to, but yes, sir, I'll answer to that, Kenny or Chief Kinsey.
And we could call you Professor Kinsey, correct?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
And then we could call you Chief Kinsey as well.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So
Well,
it does not sound like medical doctor, right? I mean, no, again, not that he's not the best thing of all time, like just love him, but no MD doesn't sound like. So PhD.
A little bit more about the law enforcement, then I want to talk a little bit more about the education. Now, you mentioned that you've done a lot of administration, and tell the jury just a little bit about what it is to be the chief.
Oh, he's very
and just what that entails, and then we'll
Very
talk a little bit more about sort of the crime scene stuff, if you would.
Yes, sir. I answer directly to an elected sheriff. I'm the number 2 man
He's awesome.
at the sheriff's office. And I supervise approximately, when we're full, when every slot is full, I supervise over 127 people. 105 are certified law enforcement men and women. And that encompasses about 9 different divisions at the sheriff's office, including narcotics, special operations, criminal investigation, civil, courtroom, school resource officers. There's several groups in there, and our civilian employees.
Now, as you've already testified, you don't just do the administration stuff as a number 2 man, but over your career, you've also extensively done actual law enforcement work, processing homicide and other major crime scenes. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, I have. I have boots on the ground, processed north of 800 death scenes. Not all of those are homicide. That also includes suicides, accidental deaths, and unexplained deaths. That is either as a primary investigator or as a secondary investigator in my career. And I still have a directive that I placed with my coworkers approximately 11 years ago. I still go to every death scene if possible.
And over that time, you said over 800 death scenes over the course of your career. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And then, how many pieces of forensic evidence do you think you've processed over the years?
That would be hard to determine, multiple pieces for each scene, but part of my duties.
Homicides then.
Yes, sir. Part of my duties when I was at SLED was to also process evidence that was submitted through the door. And what through the door means, these are items of evidence from other agencies that have worked their own crime scenes, and they send their items to SLED for an analysis. And that's in the thousands. I would have no way to give you a quantitative number.
In the thousands?
Yes, sir.
Is it also over the years, have you attended autopsies as part of your investigative work as it relates to death scenes?
That is correct. Every agency I have worked at had a mandate that you attend autopsies to collect evidence, do major case prints, GSR, and that kind of thing. And also to give the pathologist an idea of your interpretation of what happened.
And have you ever been asked to consult on death cases in jurisdictions throughout the state or even in other states?
Yes, sir, I have.
And describe that to the jury, please.
As a consultant, I work for, to be frank and honest, sometimes it's against law enforcement. Sometimes it's defending law enforcement, just depending on what I believe is wrong and right. Mm-hmm. And I have participated with private attorneys in the civil process doing both. And I've also been asked by colleagues and comrades across the country to review a piece of evidence if they may have needed a qualified examiner to technically or administratively review that piece of evidence or their findings.
All right. Before I come back to the specific crime scene training and experience that you have, I just want to go back again to your education. You went to Clemson, right?
Yes, sir.
Right. And started a law enforcement career not long after that?
That is correct.
And what year did you graduate Clemson?
I was on a 5-year plan. I graduated in 1991, and I started as a reserve deputy. The records are a little shaky because back then you worked until they had a certification class, but best I can guess was somewhere around 92, 93.
So 91 Clemson?
Yes, sir.
I was 92 Carolina. All right. Then you went on to Troy University at some point later in your career?
I did, yes, sir. I attended Troy's satellite campus, which is in Sumter, an actual brick and mortar school. And the purpose of Troy being placed in Sumter is because of Shaw Air Force Base. A lot of our men and women who protect our country use their GI Bills to further their education at such campuses. And I had to travel 1 night a week and 2 days a week for approximately 1.5 years to complete that, pass proficiency.
All right. That competency exam, is that a pretty tough exam?
It's the second toughest thing I've ever done. Yes, sir.
Is the pass rate pretty low on that thing first time?
It is very low. We probably had 30 people in our class, and I only know of 4 that passed the competency the first time.
Were you one of them?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I love him. I love him.
And then you went on and got your doctorate. Is that right?
I did. Yes, sir.
And that was at Walden University program there?
It was. Yes, sir.
Did you have to do any residencies with that?
Mr. Waters, we'll stipulate to him as a qualified expert if we can go ahead and move on.
Thank you.
All right.
To explore the extent of his qualifications, that goes directly to the value of his opinion to the jury. I'll do it expeditiously, but I think we're entitled to do that.
Do you accept the stipulation or no?
I do accept the stipulation. I would like to very quickly finish up the qualification process.
What this is, because he's so awesome, the objection came from Dick Harpootlian, one of Alex's defense attorneys, basically saying we don't want the jury to hear any more about how awesome he is, so we'll stipulate that he can be an expert.
So that the jury understands that.
Ladies and gentlemen, he is so qualified. You may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. All right. So real quick, you did some residencies in your doctorate. Is that correct?
I did 4 residencies in Atlanta. Yes, sir.
All right. And ultimately did dissertation and all that comes with getting your doctorate relevant to criminal justice and criminology. Is that correct?
I defended my prospectus and my dissertation. Yes, sir, successfully.
So
All right.
Long Time got really playful during this trial with the layout, which is really funny.
Let's get to the last thing I want to cover as far as your qualifications, but what specific areas of crime scene investigation and reconstruction?
Okay, you'll notice that. Okay, another thing that's different, right? So Creighton, you'll notice you don't see him right now. He paces the entire time. Whenever he paces back into the frame, you'll notice another thing that's so unique. He walks around with coffee in his hand. Love it.
Construction, have you had training and experience and previous qualifications in?
Yes, sir. I have been certified international.
So Topcat has a good question. Does he use videos, downloads, charts, etc.? Oh, he does, but he'll do you one better. You guys are in for a treat. Y'all that haven't seen this trial. You guys, does he ever? You will. There's things we will see today in this during this testimony that you guys will never see again in a trial ever.
Nationally by the International Association for Identification.
Very special.
As a crime scene technician, that's a 5-year deal. And then 5 years as a crime scene investigator, where you have to do practical and written examinations. And you have to have statistics in your background, a certain number of each item to even be able to take the test. And that encompasses all of the different aspects of crime scene investigation. My training also encompasses footwear and tire tread examination, bloodstain pattern analysis, crime scene reconstruction, fingerprint examination, and fabric impression, but I haven't done a lot of the fabric impression.
I will just say he would also be a great expert for Brian Kohberger, right? Like he's you guys will
Have you
see
ever
him.
been qualified in courts of record as a expert in crime scene examination and reconstruction?
Yes, sir, I have.
How many times?
Approximately 35, 36 times.
Have you ever been qualified as an expert in fingerprint examination?
I have, yes,
How
sir.
many times?
Maybe 20, 25. Sometimes, and let me explain why. Sometimes it's not individually. Sometimes you'll qualify for 2 or 3 of the different disciplines, and I didn't keep
Which he does probably all the time.
track of which time, was singular or which time was multiple qualifications.
All right. And then have you ever been qualified as an expert in footwear examination?
I have, sir, approximately 8 times.
And tire tread as well?
Yes, sir.
All right. I believe that's what I wanted to go through with your qualifications, which I believe you stipulate in those areas. Is that correct? All right. Let's move on. Did you have an opportunity to review at the request of the state the crime scene here as it relates to Maggie and Paul?
I did. Yes, sir.
And just very quickly, what are some of the types of things that you reviewed as part of your process?
When I do a reconstruction, I look at the available evidence as I feel it's pertinent to help me answer some
Yeah,
questions.
the top guy's right. If the Commonwealth is, I agree, it's huge. And the thing is for Kenny Kinsey, whoever he testifies for, and until the end of time, like anywhere in the country, whoever calls him, I will, like, he is not going to give a bias. Seriously, you guys will see. He is, it's rare, right? But he is so credible that I will put 100% faith in whatever he says. I mean, and he's not going to give an opinion that is iffy, and he's not going to speculate, and he's not going to, yeah. And you're right, Topcat too. He could have just been consulted, but the thing is that they have to have somebody to replace Trooper Paul, and he had already said, they're not using Trooper Paul, so they need to have they need another, And again, Trooper Paul helped. He was billed, quote unquote, as an accident reconstruction specialist, right? So they need literally that. They need an accident reconstruction specialist, and that's literally what Kenny Kinsey is. So, I mean, if they just had him consulted, they would have to have somebody else. So we'll see. But either way, it's still huge, right? Even if he was just consulted, his opinion to me has a lot. It means a lot. So.
And the questions that or the things I wanted to accomplish from this reconstruction, you can determine sequence, you can determine movement. A lot of times you can determine the number of blows, or in the event of a hand-to-hand combat or a firearm was used, those kind of things. So I examined forensic reports that were issued by law enforcement laboratories. I also examined extensively photographs that were taken on the scene, measurements, that kind of thing. And I also responded to the scene. It was rather close, and I took my own measurements.
When you say responded to the scene, when did you first get involved in this guy?
The end of 2022, and I'm not talking about when the scene was actually going on. I went after the fact and did my own measurements.
All right. And when you were retained by the state in this case, were you told any particular goal, or were you told to just take a fresh look at it and offer your opinions?
I was told to look at all of the evidence and determine what I may be helpful on, and to use my own judgment objectively, independently, and come up with my own conclusions.
All right, let's talk about, if we can, and again, we're going to have to deal with some of, maybe not the images as much, but deal with some of the injuries that Maggie.
And I will say, so there's no graphic images, so you don't have to worry about that, guys. But the details are pretty graphic.
Suffered, correct?
Those of us who've watched this trial are used to it.
Yes, sir.
Let's, if you could, just remind the jury what were the injuries that Paul suffered, please.
They were very, very severe firearms injuries. One was a shotgun wound to just a little anatomical left of the midline of the body. One was to the shoulder, and it proceeded into the jaw and ultimately into the head.
Okay, and again, for anyone who's not watched this trial, the defendant is sitting there on the left-hand side with the glasses, and you can see him there with the red hair. The two victims here, Paul is or was the defendant's, now convicted, but son, right? Maggie was his wife. So it was his wife and son, all right?
And was that the first injury or the second?
The first injury was the shotgun wound to the middle of the chest, and it was non-fatal,
Right.
at least not fatal immediately.
And then what about the second injury?
The second injury was immediate death.
And were you able, in reviewing the crime scene evidence, to come to any conclusions as to the order in which Paul suffered those gunshot wounds from the shooter?
Yes, sir, I was.
All right, and please relate that to the jury.
My conclusion was that the first non-fatal wound to the midline of the body occurred as Paul was standing with his body canted in the middle of that dog food room, pointed slightly southwest, and the shot entered the midline of his chest, exited his underarm, entered his underarm on the actual arm, and exited the outside of his arm. And most of those 9 pellets proceeded through the back window of that dog food room.
Right, and then just real quick, you said 9 pellets.
Right.
So explain that to the jury why you
Right
say.
now, I was going to do this, and then I was like, wait, I bet he's going to explain it. And then sure enough, here comes the question. So for anyone who isn't familiar with firearms, which anything I know about firearms, I learned from this trial, basically, right? He's about to explain, which the jury has already heard it at this point, but he's going to explain it again. What the difference is basically between like a shotgun and like other types of firearms, and what the pellets are. So he'll explain this. So
9 pellets.
That double-aught buckshot shot shell contains 9 pellets and I guess you describe it as a styrofoam packing to keep it tight so it doesn't shake. And when that cartridge is expelled out of the end of that barrel, the styrofoam packing dissipates or goes its own way, and those projectiles continue in the correct path.
And hold on for me real quick. I want to get a couple things marked.
So another good question. Does this guy do the digital forensic cell data, car data? So they didn't talk about that in terms of his expertise. So whether he does or not, they're not offering him. I don't think so. They did have, like, their experts for that came from SLED, which is the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division. And don't worry, I pulled up some of my presentations from when I covered this trial that we can go through as well, because you guys might end up having some questions as we go through this. And so I have those presentations ready with the car telemetry and and you guys might recall on that we had a recent live stream for Brian Kohberger, and we pulled up that timeline. Do you guys remember the timeline we looked at where it had the cell towers and we talked about the iPhone location data, and we were talking about all that, right? So that was from this trial, right? So y'all saw the example of just what it looks like when you put everything together in the timeline. So what they did, this is towards the end of the state's case in chief. They had Kenny Kinsey testify, and then after Kenny Kinsey, they had their top, I think, like the last two detectives from SLED, and they finished their case in chief with that master timeline that we took a look at. But what he does is like what you'll see here, he's really more about literally like he goes to the crime scene and like he looks at everything and like literally figures out what happened. So it's more like the physical evidence versus digital. But yeah, again, they did have other experts that did a phenomenal job in that area. So he said he's gonna take a moment. It is a specialized area to talk about, yeah.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as states 531.
He's just going to say he knows these exhibits. So we'll jump ahead while he says, yep, I've seen these. And then they're going to put them on the screen.
Tell the jury just generally what these are, please.
These are views of the floor of the feed room.
Okay.
And a view from the entrance to the feed room and some digitally placed legs that I placed in there to show Paul's approximate position in that feed room at the time of the shooting.
Your Honor, at this time I'd offer for states 531, 533.
They're getting in evidence. Right. So yeah, so this is not actually Paul, right? These are going to be digital legs that he put in the feed room that we'll see here in a second.
Make sure we can see it all right.
Using the Elmo? I thought he was using the Elmo. Freaking spinning wheel. I love it when he puts his glasses on, though, too.
You were talking a little bit about Paul's positioning and his location when that first shot happened. And if you could tell the jury your conclusion as to where he was located.
So remember, those are not real legs. Those are digital legs, right?
When that shot was fired. And then if you want to step down, and if you could maybe point out what was added to this image to kind of reflect your conclusion in that regard.
Thank you.
And there's a dowel stick right behind you if you want to use that.
They love this dowel stick here. The dowel stick was a big part.
Okay, as you see here, those are the digital legs that I placed there showing Paul's approximate position as he was standing when he had the first gunshot wound. Here along the floor, what you see are passive or 90-degree blood droplets. And when blood, you can tell a lot from the direction of blood by the way it strikes an object. Blood has a cohesive factor. It's viscous. And you probably heard that term before with the motor oil for your car. It's thicker than water. And the thing that causes that blood droplet to change shape is the friction and the direction and how much force was used. Well, a 90-degree drop just is exactly that. It's perpendicular to the ground. So these 90-degree drops right here tell me that Paul was standing there for a moment. Can't tell you how long, but those drops were running down from that wound on his arm, more than likely his arm, because his chest area had a shirt on it. It takes a little while for that blood to make it through the shirt, but it'll run down the outside of your arm and drip off your fingers. And you can see these 90-degree droplets here, and then they actually lead to the door. You can follow the path to the door. He's not moving very fast
Yeah,
because most of them are
Yeah.
almost perfectly circular or 90 degrees. Had he been moving real fast, you could see some directionality in him, a tail, because the tail always tells you the direction with a blood drop.
Right.
So I know he was moving slowly, and I know he was standing in the middle of this room for some time after the first shotgun wound.
All right, and approximately how far was Paul inside the feed room? Can you describe a little bit about the dimensions of the feed room and your conclusion as to how far within the room Paul was when he was struck by that first blast?
Yes, sir. Well, the feed room is 10 foot deep by my own calculations and by looking at the other sketches. And where you see his feet here is just on the other side of the halfway point. So I went, I'm guessing because I have no way of running a tape measure because when I went there, everything was moved. But this door is 36 inches and it's approximately 1.5 feet, 2 foot past the door. So that's how I come up with that determination. And he's just on the other side of the midpoint of that 10-foot room.
Which is about how far from the doorway?
5 foot.
All right. And I'm going to show you what's been marked as 534, states 534, and see if you recognize that.
I do. Yes, sir.
All right. And tell the jury what that is real quick.
That is a general view from outside the feed room that was taken at the time the crime scene was originally processed. And I added a digital enhanced arrow showing the reader or the viewer the direction of the shot path.
All right. This time I offer states 534 and others.
Okay.
All right. I'm going to put 534 up on the screen. And if you would, just show that arrow that you're talking about that's been added to this image.
Yes, sir. Right here.
All right. And then as well, just show generally where those blood spots are. It's not the best image in the world, but where those blood spots are that led to your conclusion about Paul's location within the feed room when the first blast struck him.
The placard hasn't been moved.
So for anyone who's not so familiar, right? So this is the feed room. This is where Paul was when he was shot. So this is out at the kennels, right? Because again, this is like on a bunch of acres. So you can see these different like cage thingies, right? So that's where they had all the different dogs. Actually, you can see Bubba right there laying down. And so anyway, so it's this tiny little room, right, where they kept all the feed, feed room for dog food. And they also had like some electronic collars and just, supplies and shit in there. So Paul went in that little room, right? And so that's where he was standing. So one thing that's interesting to note as well, that the jury asked for a jury view on this one and they were allowed. And a lot of things that we learned was like that apparently the visiting the scene was really impactful for the jurors because with all the different pictures that they saw, they said they couldn't really get an idea of just how small that room was until they were actually present on the scene. That like being at the kennels, like it completely changed things of like, wow, like that could not have been communicated. Like the pictures didn't do it. The testimony couldn't do it, but being there really gave them that, an idea of what went on.
Although it's hard to see the droplets. And of course I didn't add the legs to this, but just on the other side of that placard, and then you have here a quantity of 90-degree blood droplets with a partial footwear impression in it. And then you can follow the blood droplets to the door.
Going back to states 531, again, point out to the jury, if you would, the sort of the digitally added feet that you had added. All right. And if you could, just if that's the feed room doorway, can you just sort of position me, in your opinion, how Paul was standing when that first blast happened?
That's the doorway coming in?
Yes.
Here we go. Theater time. Theater time.
About right here.
All right. And let me ask you this. In your review of the evidence and the available crime scene evidence that you've reviewed, in your expert opinion, is there any way that Paul's arms were raised when he suffered that first blast to the chest?
I see no possible way his arms were up when he suffered that first shotgun wound.
And can you explain the basis for your conclusion to the jury in that part?
Yes, sir, I can. The shot pellets real close because they stayed together. They went in as one, as a unit, and then they did what a shot pellet does. They separated once they struck the skin and made entry. Run along inside his body cavity. His underarm, if his arms would have been up, he would have had no entry wounds on the bottom of his arm and then more exit wounds on the outside. He had over 20 entry and exit wounds. And he's only
I'm going to back this up just a second. I added subtitles so I know that sometimes the accent is a little bit hard to hear. So the thing about the pellets, right, when it comes to a shotgun, that makes it so different, is versus a regular bullet where there's one wound, you know, there might be an entry and an exit wound or just an entry wound, but it's just one projectile. With these shotgun shells, there's multiple projectiles. So depending on if it's buckshot or birdshot, right, as we're going to hear, the buckshot had 9 pellets. So you've got 9. What happens is when that is the projectile is, you know, fired, right? Like what happens is basically, this is my layperson's, you know, explanation, but it all separates, right? So the pellets go all different directions. So you had 9. So the first shot was really like 9 shots, right? 9 pellets. But then when we get to the second one, that was birdshot. So that had, I think it was like 150 or something. We'll hear like 150 pellets. Okay. So imagine that, right? And that's like crazy. So that was one thing I was going to say. And then the other thing I was going to say is the significance about the arms thing, right? Is because that's one of the reasons why they were able to really say, well, there were a lot of reasons. This is just one reason why they were going to say definitively that it wasn't, Paul saw who shot him the first time, right? And it wasn't someone where he felt threatened, like a stranger or someone robbing or whatever. He didn't put his arms up because it was somebody he knew, like a family member. I know, it's awful. Yep. Oh, I know. Yeah, no, it's not crying. It's fake. It's fake crying. Fake crying. Yep. Oh yeah, he's known for it.
they struck the skin and made entry. Run along inside his body cavity. His underarm, if his arms would have been up, he would have had no entry wounds on the bottom of his arm and then more exit wounds on the outside. He had over 20 entry and exit wounds and he's only got 9 pellets. So the only way the math works out is if his arm was down. And additionally, the wad stopped and was under his arm. Had his arms been up, in my opinion, that wad would have went on and exited his body because it's only plastic. It doesn't take as much resistance to stop that wad as it does a shot pellet. And the wad stopped. It was right. You could grab it with your fingers if you would have been medical personnel and needed to. It was right there.
All right. And let me ask you this. Do you have a lot of general experience with firearms?
I do. I'm a firearms instructor for handguns, shotguns, patrol rifles, subguns, and fully automatic patrol rifles. Everything but precision rifle.
All right. And when you say an instructor, where is that?
I'm certified and I have credentials through the South Carolina Criminal Justice Academy. I've also been certified as an NRA law enforcement instructor, and I currently have a CWP endorsement to teach concealed weapons permits from the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division.
And you testified how many buckshot are typically in your average buckshot shell?
According to the literature and according to my experience, there are 9 in that particular buckshot.
Did you see any evidence? I think you've already mentioned this, but did you see any evidence from the crime scene as to what happened to some of those pellets as Paul was struck as they continued on?
Yes, sir, I did. He exited on through the back window.
All right. And I'm going to show what's already been admitted as 532.
All right.
And put that up on the screen. And if you could describe to the jury what you're talking about in that regard, please.
Now we're going to see the path of travel of the first, in the terms of the first shot, right? And the 9 pellets.
This is that window at the back of the feed room. And you can see the shot shell pellet defects here as they went through the window and continued on their path.
Those kind of big holes, are those consistent though with buckshot pellets striking that?
Yes, sir, they are. And some are bigger than others because it's just the makeup of glass. I mean, sometimes you'll get one individual hole and sometimes it'll take out, a large portion. So I have no way to know that.
All right. And just real quick, I got 533. I'm gonna put that up on the screen. And again, is that just a close up of
right there? That just made me think of as it pertains to Karen Reed. Glass is a big part of this. It comes up a lot. And, again, his expertise deals a lot with that, right? Because it's like these hands-on crime scenes. And I, again, thinking about what could pertain, firearms, obviously not going to pertain to Karen Reed, but things like the tire marks and tire impressions, right? And the collisions, right? Again, we're going to hear it later on. That does come up even in this case, we're talking about vehicles and stuff in terms of the tire tracks and like not the data, but like the physical vehicles, right? But then also, the glass, right? That's a big deal. Whether you're trying to say there was glass in the taillight, which again, that came up in the Daubert hearing and was really frustrating because it was plastic, but or glass in his hand, right? John O'Keefe's hand. So that could be something else too that he might weigh in on. We'll see.
where Paul was standing, about 5 feet or so inside that feed room?
Yeah.
It is, yes, sir.
Based on your view of the blood evidence that you saw?
Yes, sir. And here are the partial footwear impressions. And here you can see the 90-degree blood droplets and some other biological materials.
All right. And in your conclusion, what's the most likely explanation for those 90-degree blood drops? How is that physically happening?
It's the arm wound. Even though it was non-fatal, there's less restriction from clothing or anything else on the arm.
This too, right? I wouldn't be surprised if Kenny Kinsey could look at things that weren't even really brought up that much in the first trial, like things like, you know, again, like the blood pattern on the snow, right? I don't even know that we ever heard anything about that. Or like, you know, with the footprints, right? We know it was a mess because nobody did anything properly. But however, when you bring in someone like Kenny Kinsey, I wouldn't be surprised if he would notice something, even though there's a mess there. He might notice something apart from that, right? Like, I don't know. It'll be really interesting because his expertise is so vast that, you know, we'll learn a lot. That's for sure. We would learn a lot. And I mean, I feel like we would get closer to some answers as to what really happened for sure.
Arm, you know, here you've got the t-shirt that's got to completely saturate before it gets to the bottom and drops. But here on the arm, you got nothing. So once those pellets exited, entered, and exited again, that blood's free running down his arm, and then they'll drip off the ends of your fingers.
One thing I want to ask you about is you've testified as to your conclusions as to the position of Paul when that first shot struck him. Is there anything about the entrance wound itself that supports your conclusion as to the shape of the entrance wound?
Yes, it's oblong instead of completely round. And had he been standing facing that door and took that double lock buckshot to the middle of the chest, I've seen it dozens and dozens of times. Instead of coming out this side, a shot shell or a projectile doesn't make a 90-degree right. Generally, it's going to follow the same path unless it hits something hard enough to make it ricochet. It would have went on through his body. It still would have exited the window. It just wouldn't have done the damage to his arm and his underarm. So he had to be canted in this direction. And the wound is not perfectly circular. It's more oblong, which tells you that he was canted to some degree.
All right. In your review of the crime scene evidence, did you come to any conclusion about the location of the shooter when that first buckshot blast struck Paul in this chest?
It would be hard to say exact, but I can say to a bare minimum, the breech of the shotgun, because I don't have the shotgun. I don't know the length of the barrel, that kind of thing, or I could run it from the door. But the breech of the shotgun, where it ejects the shot shell casing after it fires, was somewhere inside the door. Because had it been on the other side of the door, the shot shell would have been located outside. So depending on the length of the shotgun, at least I can say the ejection port was inside the door of the shell.
All right. And then the shooter, I have this image up here, which I apologize, is states 534. And can you kind of illustrate what you're talking about to the jury using that image?
Yes, sir. The breech, the ejection port, where you load and unload that shotgun, which is a little less than midpoint from the shooter, was inside this door frame, at least to some degree inside.
And where were the expended shot shells found on this crime scene?
According to the photographs and the original crime scene, behind this door.
And is that consistent with your review of the evidence? Does that support your review of the evidence that you just, that conclusion you just related to the jury?
Very easily. If you look, this room is kind of cluttered. And I measured that door myself. It had been pressure washed, but the same door, found the same shot shell pellet defects in that door. 1.5 inches at the bottom of the door, that's plenty of room for a shot shell to bounce and roll under the door. So I have no reason to believe it didn't end up there because of the location of the shooter.
All right. All right, let me get a couple of things marked. You can kind of head back to your home base, and let me just get these marked real quick.
Don't y'all love that? You can head back to your home base. Hilarious. Exactly. That's what I'm thinking, Top Cat. Yep. Absolutely. That's what I'm thinking. That's what I'm thinking. Yep. Again, things that were not quote unquote able to be done.
Dr. Kinsey, I'm going to show you what's been marked as 535, 536, 537, and 538 state's exhibits, and see if you generally recognize those images.
Yes, sir, I do.
All right, and generally explain to the jury what these images are, and then we'll talk about them specifically.
Those are images at the door that I've added some visual enhancements to help the reader understand the flight path of the
This is really cool. This is really cool to understand the flight path of the bullets. This is really neat.
second shot and the different elements that I looked at in determining where the shooter was for the second or the fatal shot to Paul.
All right, Your Honor, this time I'd offer states 535, 536, 537, and 538 in evidence. I believe without objection.
No objection.
Admit it.
All right, let's look first at 535. And before we get to that, generally describe again to the jury your conclusion as to that second injury suffered by Paul, the fatal shot as you've described it.
Well, the first thing is, once Paul received that second shot, he never walked again. He never made any movement. Any movement he made was involuntary, and it was due to gravity, pulling his body down to the ground. When you sustain an injury to your brain like that, that ceases all movement. So he was found outside the feed door. He fell over forward after sustaining that movement. Some wounds are fatal later. You can actually see someone that receives a fatal wound, and I've seen them run 100 yards. They can move for a little while. This is not that type of wound. Once he received this wound, it ceased all movement.
All right. And did you, I'm going to put attachment, states 535 up on the screen, and tell the jury what this particular image reflects, please.
Yes, sir. If you can look at the green funnel that I've added just visually, if you look at that green funnel, that is approximately the shot shell path, the shot path from the shot shell after it did the injuries to Paul, or the direction of the shot from the shot shell. And I determined that by shot shell pellet defects that are still in the door, even though the door had been cleaned. I went and looked at it myself, run my own measurements, took the width of the door. I took Paul's approximate height. It's listed as several different things. DMV shows him at 5'6". The pathologist listed him, I believe, at 5'9". So I had to split the difference. I went somewhere in the middle. Then I deducted the distance between the top of your head and the top of your shoulder. So I took another foot off. Then I took the width of the door, and there's one other thing I looked at, and that was a void pattern that's on the door frame of the door. A void pattern is caused by something being there when the blood and biological materials are let. We call it a blood let.
Actually, great question. So he does. And so if you actually see how there's like a piece of paper taped to the computer screen there, the reason that's there is so that whenever they are showing things on the digital screen that are graphic images, right? And then they don't, so that the cameras don't accidentally, for example, they could accidentally see it on his screen. So what they do is whenever they're going to have the graphic images, they flip that paper over to cover up, like for the other cameras or whatever. But yeah, he can see it. And he would have seen everything also as well prior, like in discovery. But well, actually, now I'm trying to remember. Yeah, because there was like a thing on they had a problem early on in the trial where one of the cameras accidentally got like a snippet of one of the graphic pictures or something like that. But and so that's when they started implementing. They've got usually pieces of paper. I think some of them they have like cardboard ready to go, things like that. So
from the wound, and there's a void pattern, which tells me something was in that way. And because of the narrow door, in my opinion, it was Paul. So that's what caused that void pattern on that door. So I used all of that, and I used a dowel rod, and I used a protractor on the doorknob side of that door frame, and I ran it up, and that's what helped me establish the angle of that shot pattern.
All right, and we're going to use the images to kind of talk about that a little bit more specifically, but quickly, I want to show you 539 and 540 and see if you recognize these images.
Yes, sir, I do. 540 is my photograph when I visited the scene. And 539 is also my photograph, and it shows that top hinge of that door is approximately 72 inches at the top of the hinge.
All right, Your Honor, this time I'd move into evidence, I believe without objection, states 539 and 540.
No objection.
Admit it.
All right, let's, if you could, I'd ask you to step down again. I know I just sent you back there, but come on down.
come on down.
I'm going to put 539 up on the screen, and if you could, back down. Tell me what this image reflects, if you would, please.
Yes, sir. These are 36-inch standard yellow yardsticks. We use them to measure certain things, and it right here is the top of the top hinge. It's a 3-hinge door, and this is the top of the hinge. And then 4 inches above this are where those shot pellet defects were that I used to figure out my angle.
All right, I'm looking at 540. Who took this particular image?
I took this image.
So this would have been long after the actual event occurred. Is that correct?
This was last December. Yes, sir.
All right, and tell the jury what this image reflects.
You can still see the pellet defects in the door, and this is the approximate center of it here. So that's 4 inches above 72. That's approximately 76 inches on an 8-inch door.
I'm going to show you states 536 and explain to the jury what this is, and in particular how that's relevant to your conclusion about the angle in which Paul suffered the fatal head wound.
This is the original crime scene pictures. And this is where the pellets took their path. This is where they struck and did damage to the door. And you can actually still see the dents that are documented in my photograph.
The courtroom is packed because people came from like all over the world to attend this. But yeah, no, this was, had it not been high profile, there would have been nobody there. I mean, because this is like literally in like the, really rural, small community. But yeah, this is in Colleton County. This was not, there was no change of venue. Essentially because like Hampton County and Colleton County are like so small. And I believe also it had to do with the office that took over, the prosecuting office that took over, because see, the problem was there were all these conflicts of interest, right? Because of Alex's like grandfather, great-grandfather, and great-great-grandfather, they were the like the solicitor, and which is what they call it in that region, where it's like it's like being the lead, it's like being a DA, but they call it a solicitor, right? So of Hampton County, and so there were like all these conflicts of interest. So, but anyway, they're basically one and the same. So yeah, there was no change of venue like we see sometimes in other trials that are high profile. And the thing is like Alex wanted this to stay there, is what I remember. He had a big like, I believe, what was it they said, he actually like picked the jury, I believe, like he handpicked the jury because he was hoping that his family's legacy and influence would work in his favor to stay in the area, right? That people, because this family basically started the town, right? They've been going back for generations. And when I covered the trial, we went through all of the family history because it's really interesting, but that would work in his favor, right? And that he was a well-known attorney, right? In this law firm. And he actually for a time was an assistant prosecutor, and like he was hoping that all that would work in his favor, and didn't want to move it. So yeah.
You can see them in the original
Very
crime
interesting,
scene.
yes.
This is the concentration of blood that's caused by the brain exiting Paul's body in the path of the shot shells. And then you also have biological material, hair and blood, here at the top of the door.
You guys who are familiar with the Kentucky Sheriff one, similar thing there. Word on the street there is that, again, small, it's got a lot of overlap there, like that the sheriff, word on the street is that he doesn't want to change venue for the same reason, right? Thinking that all this goodwill and the community and all this, that the community will support him, and, banking on that with the jury. So.
Door frame. And that's where.
Why? Okay, come on.
I drew my conclusion that sometime those body parts made contact with these sections of the door. And my opinion is that it hit here, and then landed on the sidewalk.
Looking at states 537, can you explain what the jury's seeing in this image and how it relates to your opinion about the manner in which Paul suffered that fatal wound?
I can. With a major bloodletting, especially.
Dr. Kinsey, let me ask you, I'm going to move this podium and ask you to step back just a hair so that the jurors over here can see what you're saying.
Yes, sir. With a shotgun wound, you've got you've got over 800 pellets that are making damage. It's not like a single projectile from a pistol or a rifle. So there's mass damage, and it throws body fluids and blood in several different directions, but they follow the path. When I mentioned that it was a void pattern, this is the last blood drop. You can see it in the photograph that I can see, and it's approximately 5 foot right there. And this is not green tape. That is a digital effect I put on the photograph to show the void I was talking about. So it's my opinion that Paul was up against that door or real close to that door to keep that blood from striking the door at the point in time that he was shot.
All right, and the green tape reflects that blood pattern or that void area that is consistent with Paul blocking that area. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. Digital tape. It's not really tape.
All right.
Yes, sir.
And so that's been added to.
Yes, sir.
Okay. To illustrate your opinion. Right?
Yes, sir.
All right. And then 538, I'm going to show you this image. And again, if you can point out what's been added and how this relates to the conclusion that you're offering to the jury.
Yes, sir. one thing that I looked at to determine that it happened in the doorway and a little bit outside the doorway, more outside than inside, you don't just look for the presence of biological material in blood, you look for the absence of biological material in blood. Here at the top, it didn't have a scale or a ruler, so I can't tell you exactly, but looking at some of these other objects, I was able to scale it approximately 4 inches. Up here, you have a void. So I know that it happened, the second wound happened far enough outside of that door frame that the actual frame kept the biological material from hitting at the very top, right here. I also looked at these items. You got some medication, canine medication, or some cleaning materials and that kind of thing up here. You can see all the spatter at the front of those containers. And then we got what I call a demarcation line right here, and I drew it through most of these cans. And that separates the blood contaminated area and the clean area. So that tells me that it was at least forward of the angle on those containers. And that's why I believe he was shot. The second wound happened just outside the door frame, but his feet were probably still in the door frame.
I know, right?
Just quickly point to the jury. Can we see part of the door frame in this particular image?
You can, yes, sir, right here.
All right. Once, and going back now to states 535, and just for the record, we were just looking at states 538 and 537. Going back to states 535, did you reach a conclusion as to the location of the shooter on that second fatal shot that Paul suffered to his head?
Yes, sir, I did.
All right, and explain that to the jury, if you would, please.
The shooter was right here. If you're facing that door, to the right of the doorway, outside.
And would you have expected there to be, in that particular range, any sort of biological evidence in that area in proximity to the shooter?
Yes, sir, I would.
Would the door frame have potentially block any of that as well?
It would block some, and just depending on the positioning, how much of the body of the shooter was exposed. Because, once you have that kind of catastrophic injury, it's real fine blood particles and biological fluids that go in all directions. And the closer the shooter was to the muzzle, to the exit end of that firearm, the more stuff you would expect.
Let me ask you this. In your expert opinion, is there any way that Paul's fatal head injury came from the top in a contact fashion or a close fashion?
No, sir. I see no possible way for that.
And explain your conclusion in that regard to the jury, please. What factors weigh against that in your expert opinion?
Well, number one, I don't know of a way to mimic this blood evidence on this door. That pattern where that shot traveled through Paul's shoulder into his jaw, into his brain, and then took a path up and placed the biological material here at the top of the door. If he was shot in the head, then you'd have biological material out here on the ground, or at least going down, on the sidewalk in front of him. And it would be different than just free pouring blood. You would see this pattern, and you would see those high velocity blood droplets there on the ground. And plus the shooter would have to be on the roof to shoot down into him, but you wouldn't have this in the door.
In your expert opinion, did you see any support or evidence in this crime scene that could support that the injuries suffered by Paul were in any manner a suicide or self-inflicted?
I don't see the possibility, knowing that it's not a contact shotgun wound, and I'm fairly strong, and I'm bigger than Paul was, and I don't know of any way you could hold that shotgun out and shoot yourself in that direction at that angle and put that biological material on top of that door like that. I don't think it's possible.
All right, thank you. All right, I hate to keep sending you back and forth, but I'm going to send you back one more time.
Go back to home base.
Now, let me ask you this. Excuse me. The second wound, the fatal wound that Paul suffered to his head, was that buckshot or was that birdshot?
The second wound was birdshot.
All right.
So now we're going to get into the bird shot.
Describe to the jury the difference between the composition of a buckshot round as it relates to the pellets and a birdshot round.
Yes, sir, I can.
All right, please do that.
With buckshot, you've got a number of larger pellets, approximately 30, 36 caliber pellets, and you've got fewer of them. They're made for bringing down larger game. So in the typical double-aught buckshot, you're going to have 9 pellets. In your typical number 2, and it's called many things, the typical person calls it birdshot, chill shot, steel shot, coated shot. I've heard it called many things. So I just typically call it birdshot. But in this particular shot, there's approximately 150 to 156 pellets in that dry lock shot shell. So that's the difference. With the buckshot, you've got fewer and they're larger. And with the bird shot, you've got many and they're greater. They're for bringing down winged animals, squirrels, rabbits, dove, quail, turkey, duck. I mean, just depending on the number shot, that's what that's for.
All right. And about how many approximately bird shot might be in an average shotgun shell?
The literature says that it's 156 in a dry lock. I cut one open and I only counted 150, but that may have been human error.
Around 150.
Yes, sir.
In your expert opinion, when you have birdshot, is there a forensic value to collecting every single pellet, or can you explain those concepts to the jury when you're dealing with birdshot?
I always try to collect enough that the firearms examiner can weigh it, and he can have a good representative sample of what was used to cause this injury. With a projectile or a bullet, you have what's called lands and grooves, markings, rifling. Some people call it rifling, and it's caused from that projectile spinning as it goes down the barrel. You don't have that in a shotgun. And a pellet is so small that you probably couldn't find it if you could have it in a shotgun. So in my opinion, there's no forensic value as long as you have enough to determine what type of shot or what type of shell and the weight of it.
In your opinion, and you've talked about this, but was the shooter, when that fatal shot was fired, inside or outside of that door frame?
The second shot?
The second shot.
Yes, sir. It was outside the door frame.
Right. And where was that second shot shell located?
It was also located under the door.
All right. And is that still consistent with your opinion?
Absolutely.
And can you explain that to the jury, please?
Yes, sir. Like I mentioned earlier, the ejection port on a shotgun, typically, and there are left-handed shotguns, but typically the majority of shotguns, the ejection port is on the right side. So as long as that shooter had it at an angle and had that ejection port pointed toward the door, even just the least little bit, that would give plenty of opportunity for that shot shell to be ejected and go inside that door.
All right. I know I just sent you back and we'll bring you back down. I'm sorry.
Back down.
Before we move on from Paul, I would, if you could just use me as a
very good. Creighton is my absolute freaking favorite. Here we go. He just said, use me. Use me. Thus begins the reenactments, y'all.
mannequin, but can you sort of describe to me your conclusions about the positioning of Paul when he suffered that fatal head wound and just how the trajectory of that wound and that shot as you've described and as supported by the evidence?
Can I describe it and demonstrate?
Yes, please.
So jurors can see. The second wound, as I mentioned, went in his arm and caused an injury here, a large exit, and then of course exit here. So it had to be typically with the kind of non-fatal wound Paul suffered to his chest and his arm. It's my belief that now his 5'8" frame is dipping or favoring that arm, because as you know, that's over 20 something entrances and exits. I believe it would have hurt him. I believe he would have been in pain, and I believe he would have been somewhat affected. And the reason I believe that is because I've got the 90-degree blood drops moving really, really slow. If he wasn't feeling it, or if it hadn't affected him in some way, I believe his youthfulness would have allowed him to get out of there faster. But he's moving real slow to the door. So that's going to drop that angle just a couple inches, and I can demonstrate now.
Here we go.
All right. If we can make sure that juror can see.
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
All right.
That wound went in
Y'all, right now. Look at that.
approximately right here. It traveled in, and out in a straight line.
Yeah. Oh my
In a
God.
straight line.
Amazing.
Shot always goes in a straight line.
And then when you're pressing the dowel stick there, you're showing the trajectory of the wound, not implying that was a contact.
I know.
No, sir, I'm not. I'm not implying it's contact. I'm just showing the level of the wound.
All right. While I'm thinking about it, the wound to Paul's chest, did it show evidence of stippling?
Yes, sir.
All right. And just very quickly, what is stippling?
Commonly referred to as tattooing. It's
For
particles
anyone who didn't watch the Karen Reed Daubert hearing, so the reason we're watching this is because Kenny Kinsey was referenced, and it sounds like he's either going to be testifying as an expert for the Commonwealth, or at least his opinion was cited. Okay, and we know that they're not using Trooper Paul anymore, and they need another accident reconstruction specialist, right? Well, that's literally what Kenny Kinsey is, and so the world's colliding, right? Imagine. I mean, that's literally why I was like, we finished watching the Daubert hearing last night, and I was like, oh my God, we've got to watch this, because, you know, this is going to be really helpful in terms of like thinking about what could he possibly, you know, what would he testify about, and in terms of Karen Reed, but also just imagining this in that setting is insane, right?
and material that's in that shell that don't burn up because it's superheated at the time that the powder charge ignites. It doesn't explode. It ignites and burns rapidly. And that's unburnt particles of powder and other contents of that shell. They're hot. And when they hit the body, they cause stippling, or in the old days, they called it tattooing. And that's basically what it is. It works as an ink.
Looking at this particular image, Paul's about 5 feet in the feed room when he suffers the first wound, correct?
Yes, sir. That is correct.
And then he moves towards the door. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And suffers the second wound somewhere near the door frame on the inside of it.
Yes, sir. With his shoulder just outside that door frame.
And when he suffers that second wound, what happens to Paul?
He falls immediately.
And where does he fall?
He falls outside the feed room.
All right. Let's move on now, and let's talk a little bit, if we can, about the injuries to Maggie Murdaugh. If you could start out by reminding the jury of the injuries that she suffered, and then let's talk about your conclusions as to the manner and the order in which those were suffered.
Yes, sir.
All right. So if you could just remind us again of those injuries, and if you could go ahead and describe them in the order that your expert opinion they were suffered.
Yes, sir. Miss Maggie Murdaugh suffered 3 non-fatal injuries.
That's another thing, right? The order of injuries. Another thing, again, thinking about what could he bring to the table in terms of things that we just never even got any, it wasn't even questions raised about with John O'Keefe, right? I don't recall there being testimony about the order of his injuries, right? For example, the head versus the arm, right? Where in all that did the hypothermia take place? Again, so many things when you start really thinking about it, when you hear a real expert, right? You start thinking about all the things that you just never heard about. And these are all things that he could possibly shed light on, right? Hopefully, it'd be great.
From a firearm.
Oh, I
One
see
was
what you're
through her
saying.
wrist.
Yeah, like a bowling ball.
One was her left upper thigh above the knee. One was at her abdomen here, and it exited somewhere around her kidneys. Now, I'm not that kind of doctor. I can't tell you all the damage it did inside, all those organs and things, but it ran a straight line through her body. This one on her left leg and this one on her midsection were approximately the same angle. And they were really, really close in distance. One had stippling that said that it was
He's so gosh darn likable. Wow, look at that. They were changing their layout. That's a crazy pause. He's so gosh darn likable that I wouldn't be surprised if whoever's crossing him, if he does testify with Karen Reed, which looks like he will be, like that, regardless of who it is, he's going to have them laughing. I mean, and you can't not like him. I mean, really. So that's my
a
opinion.
foot closer than the other, but that would probably fit. This was either a total separate non-fatal wound, or it could have been a continuation of one of the 2 fatal wounds. Her fatal wounds were, she had an abrasion or a burn on the left side of her abdomen from the outside in. That bullet followed a straight path. It entered the end of her breast and did extensive damage to the end of her breast, entered her left jaw, side of her face area, and went into her brain. That's the first fatal injury. And it was immediate, and she dropped right where she was at. I saw no evidence that her body had been manipulated, moved, or rolled over. The second fatal injury was down into her head, and it actually did what in the day they call a keyhole injury just from appearances. The entrance and exit in the top of her head were so close it made one big injury, and then it entered into her upper shoulders and went down into her body. That would have also been a fatal wound, but it was second. In my opinion, that one came second.
All right, let's talk about that in a little bit more detail. Those first 2 wounds that you described, you believe those are the first 2 wounds she suffered?
Yes, sir, and possibly 3. I can't tell you much about this because the arm could have been moving or it could have been here.
All right, well, let's talk about the thigh wound and the abdomen wound. Did you have any conclusions about the location of the shooter as those 2 wounds were suffered?
Yes, sir, I did.
All right, and explain that to the jury if you would, please.
Right there. All right. Left leg out a little bit.
Okay.
About here and here. Here and here.
And in your opinion, were those 2 shots fired in fairly quick succession or around the same time?
I think it would have been really, really difficult to get a similar angle if they weren't. All the shooter had to do is raise the weapon or lower the weapon, and you're still on the same plane.
And did those wounds to the abdomen and to the thigh
Prepare yourselves, guys. Here we go.
reflect the presence of stippling?
They did.
And what does that indicate to you about the distance between Maggie and the shooter when those wounds were suffered?
I guess 4 or 5 feet.
Fairly close?
Yes, sir.
All right.
Oh, wait, maybe not yet.
And after those 2 wounds were suffered, and again, we'll put aside the wrist wound for a bit, what would have happened after that in your expert opinion?
In my opinion, at bare minimum, she would have been over. She would have been in pain.
Okay, here we go. I think we're getting to the best part.
I believe sometime in close proximity, she fell to the ground. And that's when the first fatal wound was delivered.
Would she have been prone on the ground or still somewhat raised above the ground or in a bent over position when that first fatal wound was suffered?
In my opinion, from the angle, she would have been on her knees and had at least one hand on the ground.
You guys see where this is going if you've not watched this before.
Those first two shots, well, let me ask you this. There were obviously 6 shell cases of 300 blackout that were used to murder Maggie Murdaugh found at the scene. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Explain to the jury, what conclusions, if any, can you draw about the location of those shell cases, if any? Explain that to the jury a little bit.
Once again, just like with the shotgun, I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I don't think there are many left-handed AR platforms. So generally speaking, the ejection port's going to be on the right side. I own 7. Some of them throw it, the shell casing a little bit forward. Some throw it a little bit back. Some throw it perfect 90 degrees to the ejection port. If they were always uniform where they come out, if you go target practice, you could place a bucket there and all your shell casings would drop in the bucket. You wouldn't have to bend over and pick up your shell cases. Unfortunately, that's not the real world. So I don't put a lot into that unless I have the actual weapon and we can test the weapon with the same ammunition and you can generally get an idea of where that shell casing is going to go. So no, sir, I don't pay a lot of attention to it. And I definitely don't think the sequence of from one end to the other or from this end to this end means that's necessarily the movement of the shooter.
All right. You said that when she suffered that first fatal wound, in your opinion, I mean, she would have been over and perhaps been on her hands and knees. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. I'm going to get down on my hands and knees. And if you could come around here and kind of show me where the trajectory of that wound would have gone, the first wound that was fatal for Maggie Murdaugh. I guess you come behind me. Yes, sir.
Oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. This is happening right now. Look at this.
Right here. The shooter was right here, approximately right here.
Y'all.
All right. And show us the trajectory as it went through Maggie into her brain.
Yes. It burnt or grazed her stomach outside to inside, went through the end of her breast, into her jaw, and then into her brain.
Okay. And what would have been the effect on her once that shot was suffered?
She would have immediately fell down with the front of her body.
All right.
And that is the position her arms were in the original crime scene photograph.
She is lying face down. I can't, y'all. Literally, never will we see this again. Incredible. This is, talk about commitment as a prosecutor.
And while I'm down here, so I don't have to get up again, tell me about the fatal shot and position of the shooter as the evidence in case 2.
The second shot was not as close, but it still wasn't a long distance. It was approximately here into the crown of the head.
And use a dowel stick to show that injury that Maggie suffered.
Oh my God. Oh my, look at this. Oh my God.
In,
Stepping
out,
over,
in that line.
steps right over Creighton's head. I'm dying.
Need to go to the dry cleaner after this. All right.
Yeah.
The first shot, the first fatal shot, that would have immediately been fatal. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
The second shot also would have been fatal had she still been living, but in your opinion, she was not at that point. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right.
One thing I will note too is that, like, just thinking about how, like, when Kenny Kinsey said something about consulting. So the thing is this, right? So whenever, regardless of if you're the state or if you're the defense, right? Whenever you're finding expert witnesses, right? And you're consulting with them, right? The whole point is like what you want to be able to say is, okay, just take a look. We're not going to tell you what we want you to find. Just take a look and then let us know what you find, right? And then this is the whole thing, is then at that point, they turn over their findings. And then at that point, whoever it is, the state or the defense, would choose whether or not they're going to use them at trial, right? And so sometimes you might have it where either side, goes through a number of different experts in whatever the particular field is for whatever the question is before they find someone who has findings that they're like, all right, we're going to use this guy, right? And so if that's the case, those expert witnesses that they don't use at trial, that doesn't come in at trial, right? So what I'm wondering, I just was thinking about this, is that what I'm wondering is this, whenever, for many of us, but for me, right, watching the ARCA dudes, even though Trooper Paul was such a disaster, when you look at the ARCA dudes, right, I thought to myself, how would the Commonwealth actually be able to find an accident reconstruction specialist who's actually credible at all, who would be able to actually say that John O'Keefe was hit by a car? Because literally it seems impossible. Like how will they find that person, right? And so again, we haven't heard the closest we've heard is them mentioning Kenny Kinsey. But I was just thinking about this because I was thinking about what would happen if they can't find anybody, right? For example, what if they go, they have Kenny Kinsey, take a look at everything, offer what his opinion is, right? And he had that one, what they quoted in the Daubert hearing, that he had maybe one finding that was maybe helpful, which they referenced, right? But what if his overall total opinion or whatever completely obliterates the state's theory of the case, right? They wouldn't call him. And then what if they go through another witness and another? And I was just thinking about it because, again, thinking back in time to the initial trial, my thought was, how would they have found an expert or an expert accident reconstruction specialist, like a real one, not a true Paul, who could, and so it's funny because I kind of forgot about that. And now they're in that position where it's like, here we're coming up to the second trial. And have they found anybody? That's the real, do they have one? I mean, again, if it's Kenny Kinsey, I believe what he says and I trust him implicitly, right? And I guarantee you, whatever he finds, it might be that it's the best thing for the Commonwealth. It might be that it's not definitive, but maybe it's better than nothing. Or I don't know, right? It could be, sometimes we have expert witnesses where they have things that are good for either side, and they end up being neutral, or they're good for both sides, they end up being neutral, right? I don't know. But no matter what, I would trust his findings. And but it will be interesting. My point is this: if they don't call him at trial, what that means is his findings disproved the Commonwealth's theory. Then that would be why they don't use him. So
she may have had a sign of life, but there was no movement. She was not capable of any movement at that time.
All right, go ahead and have safe one. Of course, as soon as I say that to you, I'm sure probably going to have to go back up. Let me talk about something else real quick before we come back to this. All right, I'm going to show you what's been marked as States 541 and see if you recognize this document.
So it's interesting to know that right now the waterworks coming on, Alex, but there's no graphic image being shown, because if it was, that paper would be over it. So, again, this. I think he might have forgotten about that when he would sometimes burst into tears like that, when it was like there was no testimony happening either right now, right? Like there was nothing happening. And anyway, just.
I'll bring it back to you. Hold on.
Yes, sir, I do.
All right, tell the jury generally what this document is, please.
That is a comparison and presentation that I put together over an unidentified impression on Miss Maggie Murdaugh's left calf.
Okay. Your Honor, this time I would move States
Now we're
541
getting
into
into like the tire tread footwear impression situation.
evidence under seal. Okay.
Submitted without objection.
If we could
So
make sure.
great example. So now this is not going to be, as you can see down here at the bottom, you've got one of the court reporters putting a piece of cardboard up over the screen, and they're going to put their papers over the screens and all that right now.
For the monitors are secured, please.
Yep, there you go. There they go with their papers. So only the jury will be seeing this picture.
All right, I'm gonna, are all the monitors secured? We're good? All right. I'm gonna put States 541 up on the screen. I'm sorry. We're good. I got thumbs up court ticket, correct? All right. Moving 541 and putting it up on the screen. If you could tell me, first of all, what do we see here before we get to your analysis on this particular issue?
This is a general photograph of an impression on Miss Maggie Murdaugh's left calf.
Okay.
Yeah, if that's,
And we also see.
Yeah, if all Brennan said was that the arm wounds were not from a dog, he won't be allowed, regardless of anything else, he would not be allowed to testify to that at the trial, because remember, in Massachusetts, as Judge Bev has said, causation of an injury has to come from a medical doctor. So he would not be able to testify to that. Again, he could talk about the car, he could talk about all the other things that we've mentioned, but he cannot talk about the injuries on the arm coming from a dog or not, a causation of the injury. Unless she reverses her, I mean, I don't know how she can go back on that, right? That's really the thing. Because that came up with the ARCA dudes, right? That came up with the ARCA dudes, and that's when that happened. And that's what she said. She said that's Massachusetts law or whatever, that you can't, that it has to be from a medical doctor. And that's what she said at that time. So again, that would be why he could maybe reference that in the hearing, but it couldn't come in at trial. So
A wound on this particular, in this picture?
You can see the exit wound from that thigh.
And that's why, because he might know that's the only time he can get that out, right? Because it can't come into trial, but he could say it in the Daubert hearing. Because he was just referencing that one thing. So that would be why, because for the public to hear it, right?
Wound that I described earlier.
All right. And what, if anything, did you notice about or conclude from the sort of the blood pattern on the back of her thigh?
She stood a little while.
Kenny Kinsey, again, he can still testify to all the other things. They just can't give causation of the injury to the causation of injury. Now, again, he could probably talk about like the timing of it, right? Like we were saying, the order of events, other things, but not the causation. So
I can't tell you how much time, just like with Paul, but she was standing after she suffered that thigh wound because the blood is running down the leg and gravity always pulls it to the earth.
All right. And then, I sent you back there. I'm going to just bring you back on down. I'm sorry about that. Bring the stick. If you would, and again, make sure you stay out of the way of the jurors. Was there any sort of mark or any sort of mud mark on the back of her leg?
Yes, sir, it was.
All right, and point that out to the jury, please.
Right here, an unknown impression on her leg.
Okay. And did you engage in an analysis of that particular impression?
I did, yes, sir.
All right, you just stay there. I think it's probably easier than sending you back. I'm going to move to the next slide. And just
here's Alex's brother, John Marvin.
tell me what this is, if you would, please.
That is the same impression, unknown impression. I've just cropped everything out so you can concentrate on the actual impression.
All right. Moving on to the third page of this exhibit. What is this?
This is a side.
As you can see everybody in the gallery. So once you did the close-up of the footwear impression, so that is not sealed. That's why they're all like getting to look, right? Because it's not showing the whole body. It's just showing the footprint.
Side-by-side all-terrain vehicle that was in close proximity to Miss Maggie Murdaugh's body, where her final spot where they located her, and this is in close proximity to where she was located.
All right, stand by for me real quick.
There's Alex's son Buster, right here.
I'm going to show you what's previously been admitted to evidence as State 70 and State 71. And can you tell me what these images reflect?
That is that Polaris ATV side-by-side that I mentioned.
All right, and generally remind the jury where this was located.
Miss Murdaugh was laying face down. That was to her left, underneath a overhang or a I don't know what you call it, a shed that was attached to that airplane hangar. A lean-to. That's the word I was trying to think of.
It was very horrific.
And do you see any indication of any biological material in the crime scene images that were taken of that Polaris?
That was my first indicator. That's what made me concentrate on a specific tire. Yes, sir.
And let me see how washed out that is, if I can maybe fix it. And can you point out an example of what you're talking about on that image?
Yes, sir, I can.
And I can bring you the original image if that's better.
Right here, we've got some kind of biological material, and I'll tell you the reason I believe that to be so. Like I said, blood has a viscosity or a cohesive factor to it. That's why a blood drop stays together. You know, if you throw a drop of water on a tire, what's going to happen? It's going to run down. But here,
That is thicker than water.
and actually here on the front of that four-wheeler, in my opinion, that's some type of biological material.
All right. I'm going to do one other thing. Let me slide by you real quick.
What is he doing?
All right, looking now at defense 29. Again, if you could, just this is the feed room right here. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And just if you could, just point to the general location of this ATV and where it was located in the crime scene.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Right here in this area.
All right, and that would be, again, on this is not to scale, but that would be at least on this diagram where Maggie was, is that correct?
Yes, sir. That's our approximate location.
All right. Looking at, going back to this particular slide. And,
Like, think about like how active is this versus other trials we watch, right? Like where people are just like sedentary and there's no, like, that's why I was like saying, like when we asked earlier, like, are there going to be exhibits, right? I'm like, there's all kinds, right? We've got pictures on the screen. We've got actual posters. We've got actual acting it out. We have literally everything. And everybody's really active, right? They're not lazy. That's for sure.
and your analysis of this tire. If you would explain a little bit about what you see here and what an examiner looks at in looking at sort of this particular tire as it relates to your analysis.
Yes, sir. What we look at it as footwear and tire tread or tire track examiners, we look at the actual tread pattern and design of that tire or that shoe. And there are a couple different conclusions you can come up with. We compare known and unknown. It's not like you see on TV where you take a picture of a shoe and feed it into a computer. Some people have footwear databases, but it still has to be examined by a human. There's no magic machine. If it is, I've never seen it. What we look at the dimensions of the tread pattern. We look at the shape, the sole, the outsole design, the tread design, the measurements, and we try to find class characteristics. That's shape, size, sometimes depth, or the physical properties included in that pattern. And then to make a complete identification, that's a class characteristic. That's saying there's an association, either this shoe or this tire could have made this unknown impression, or another one just like it could have made this unknown impression. So that's a class or an association. Then you got an identification. That's where you say, to the exclusion of all others, this shoe or this tire made this print. Now, to make an actual complete identification to the exclusion of all others, you've either got to have what's called a random unique characteristic, a thumbtack in the bottom of someone's shoe, bubble gum, damage to the tread pattern on that tire. You know, you hit something and it cut a tread pattern. So that's pretty difficult unless you have the actual tire, the actual shoe, and then you take it and compare it to the unknown. And what you'll do is take that tire and three-dimensional comparisons are always better than two-dimensional. Two-dimensional is a photograph. You can't tell depth. You have the actual cast of that footprint or that tire. Now you've got three-dimensional. You've got the width, the length, and the depth. So it's a little bit better to have a three-dimensional to compare with, but you can do a lot with a two-dimensional. If you can get it scaled to the size, you can associate it with another thing. You're looking for them unique random characteristics. They call them accidentals. It's something that happens by accident, just because of the way you walk, the way you drive, what you might hit. And that's what you look at when you do a tire or footwear impression analysis.
I'm going to move on now to the next page and your exhibit, and tell the jury what these two images are, please.
Yes, sir. This is the unknown impression on Miss Maggie Murdaugh's left calf. Yeah. And this is the photograph of the known front driver's side tire of that side-by-side.
All right. And when you started to compare these two, did you have to make any account for the relationship of Maggie's thigh and this ACEV tire?
I did.
Now explain that to the jury, please.
Just like if you're driving in your car and an ambulance comes up behind you and you look in the rear view mirror, you can read ambulance. But if you look at the front of that ambulance, it's written backwards because you're looking through a mirror. Well, with a shoe, a tire, or Miss Maggie Murdaugh's leg, you can't see through her leg. You can't see through the tire. So you have to flip one of them or the other. So flipping the tire, in my opinion, because it has some characteristics on it that I wanted the reader to be able to look at, I chose to flip the impression on her leg to do the comparison. Because unless you do footwear and tire tread examinations, you're not going to be able to look at something in reverse and find those points.
So this is the original orientation, is that correct?
It is, yes, sir.
And then flipping over to your next slide, that's where you've reversed the image, is that correct?
Same photograph. I just pulled it over. In the old days with 35 millimeter film, and I'm from the old days, we just flipped the negative. That's all you had to do. It's a little bit more complicated in the digital world, but not that hard to do. But this is a direct representation. It's just in reverse.
All right. Continuing on as we go through your analysis, what does this reflect?
This is just a side-by-side so you can understand the orientation here, 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 and here. Those are the two treads that we're talking about now.
All right.
And by the way, those on the tire are the only treads at that level on her calf that I believe needed to be examined.
All right, and again, these are just additional images illustrating what you were focusing on in your analysis?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then this one right here?
Yes, sir. That's a side-by-side view once again, with all the background cut out of it.
All right, and then the final one is this. Explain this to the jury and how this supports your opinion.
This is my actual comparison, and we use a process called ACEV, where you analyze, compare, evaluate, and verify. It's a peer-reviewed process. I never go by just my results. I always have another competent examiner with like experience and like skills look at my work, because if you're going to make a mistake, that's where the mistake's found. You don't want to put a conclusion out for something important and you miss that. And that is a very important process in the examination world, that you use peer-reviewed process. You have someone else look at it. And so what I do, so that person and the jury in the court, Your Honor, so that person can look at these details. I've got a markup here showing some unique random characteristics that I've used, but I also put the actual impression there so you can make your own decision. I didn't want to look like I was being deceptive and put enhancements in there and point things. You can look at it, make your own conclusion. But I wanted to.
See what I mean? I don't think I've ever seen an expert do that, where they actually don't even they're like, we're going to let you make your own conclusion. Here's the pictures, point, so you can see make your own conclusion. I'm not going to do that for you. It's the province of the jury. I mean, incredible, right? This is what I'm saying. This dude, yes.
Put it right next to mine, so you know I'm being straight here, or you can make your own opinion.
All right, very quickly, is it your expert opinion that this mark on the back of Maggie's leg is a tire impression and not anything else?
That is a tire tread impression. That is my opinion.
All right, now I see you have a number of arrows here that have different colors, and so I'd like to move through those and you explain what you're pointing to with those arrows in this image, okay?
Absolutely.
Let's start with the baby blue one and tell the jury what that indicates to you.
Now you're gonna have to tell me, because I can't tell shade from up here.
Right.
Okay, the top one.
Yep.
Yes, sir. All right, here you've got your unknown impression. You see down there? Here you got your unknown impression, and what I pointed here is at the start of that impression, and it's in mud, by the way. It's in mud, and so it's really, really fragile, but it's still here. You got an unknown impression, and here's approximately where it starts in the unknown, and here is where it starts in the known. And you can look at both the marked up one and the actual impression itself.
All right.
And it's here.
All right, and then moving on to this one right here, kind of we got a purple one, and then kind of that
Yes, sir. I see.
whatever that one is. But explain
Yes,
to the jury what you're seeing there and how that supports your conclusion.
Right here is the other side of that tread, and this tread is this tread is this tread. Those two are the same. And right here, you can see it come up, and it actually makes a complete corner there. Comes up, and it curves out just a little bit there.
All right, and is that consistent with the sort of unique shape of that top tire?
Yes, sir, it is. Right here, and then it comes up. Now it's exaggerated a little bit in the drawing, but that's the best I could do with a stylist trying to get it there.
And are those very distinct patterns that you see in the mud that match up with that particular tire?
Yes, sir. Not so much the corner there, but these in here are. You can see a unique random characteristic here, and all that is a void pattern in the mud. You can also see it here. I mean, almost perfect. You can see one here where the yellow area is. You can see it here. It's right there.
All right, you're kind of doing a little mountain or a little hump. And explain on that with the jury. Why is that particular? Why is that significant to you?
Because that's not in the process of making the tire. That's because whoever drove that side by side last hit some dirt or some mud, and that is a pattern that's left in mud on the tire. And in my opinion, it transferred to Miss Maggie Murdaugh's calf.
All right, and show the jury where you're talking about the little hump on
Yes,
this
sir.
image right here. If you can show it.
It's marked with a yellow arrow, and here it is, right here. And I've marked it there, but you can look at the one that's not marked, and you can also see it here.
All right, talking about this bottom impression, we got a white arrow to that line right there. Explain that to the jury. What's significant in your analysis of it?
I marked that because unless you examine, unless you got really, really good eyesight, you might not even pick up on that. But here you've only got a partial line. The whole line didn't show through in the transfer of the mud or dirt or debris. And I kept myself honest. I only highlighted the length of that, but you can also see it here and here. You can see that side of that tread, that tire tread.
All right. And moving on now to to the this green one right here, and kind of green to the baby blue to that blue, just kind of going around there. If you could explain that to the jury and its significance, if any, to your
It's
analysis.
just a continuation, and there's a little break in there, but they're still the same angle, same lines, and they match up. And that's just because the dirt didn't transfer completely. But you got plenty of skeletonized line here to show the outline of that tread here, here, and here. And that's here, here, and here.
In your opinion, that's a tire impression. Is
That is
correct?
entire.
Right. So he's like saying, so it's just to sort of explain that. So like there's defects in the Polaris tire, right? The ATV tire. And because of those defects, the mud collects in a certain pattern with those certain defects, right? And then that pattern with those defects with the mud transferred to Maggie's leg because she bumped into it, right? Oh, welcome. I think you might be new here. Welcome if you are Autumn Waves. Charts visuals would be great in the Karen review trial, but I don't think Andy Bev wants or allows them. She was so nasty to the defense during a pretrial. Right. Yeah. Right. So you're thinking of like in as it pertains to Dr. Russell. Because in terms of like the accident reconstruction specialist, you know, I guess with the defense, you've got the ARCA dudes, but like, you know, the question here about Kenny Kinsey, that would be for the Commonwealth. And, you know, she tends to be leaning towards the Commonwealth. But yeah, I mean, in general though, right? Again, like much drier testimony, if you will, right? Like there weren't that, you know, and it's not just that trial. There's a lot of trials, right? Where it's like, why is there not an exhibit for this, right? Where they're just like reading you data and reading the jury data, right? Like all these, and it's like, what does this even mean, right? And I don't understand why. I mean, judges would keep that out, right? Because it's like, you know, the whole point is you want to be able to aid the jury. And it's one thing I love, you know, Jose Baez, right? In the Casey Anthony trial, I always reference this when we're watching those, is that like, you know, one thing he does that's awesome is with every single witness, he goes and grabs that easel, right? Where it's just like blank pieces of paper and he grabs permanent markers and he has them face the jury and basically teach the jury and write it all out. And it's awesome. So, yeah. And it wouldn't be, well, I don't think that there wouldn't be a flat out rule like that because it would be jurisdiction by jurisdiction and it would also depend on the judge and it would depend on what it is, right? Like in other words, certainly the charts, you know, for example, would be used in Daubert hearings, you know, for sure. Remember, they have to prove, the whole point of a Daubert hearing is to prove that there is a foundation to what it is that the expert is going to testify to, right? So, but for that to not be let in at a hearing, that would be, again, a jurisdictional or even on a court-by-court basis. Upcoming court proceedings, like the hearings. Well, I'm going to be covering them. So there's that. But if you're looking for like, a, like the calendar, like from the court, that would be, like what you could do is go, what I do, right? The way that I know there's hearing on the Idaho Judicial Cases of Interest page. And you just scroll down to the docket and then you like notice of hearing, like that's how you learn that there's a hearing. And then you pull it up and you see, and it'll say if it's closed or not, or if they're going to, like in terms of the hearing on the 23rd, the next hearing is the 23rd, right? But they're going to have a hearing on the 21st that is closed where they're going to talk about whether or not they're going to allow the public there for the 23rd or cameras or whatever. And the hearing on the 23rd may also spill into the 24th. So 21st is definitely sealed. Hopefully 23rd and 24th, if needed, will be open. But those are the hearings on the motions to suppress. So I will definitely be covering those as well. But yeah, there's not just like, there's no link, like the closest thing to a link that would have that, the best thing I can say is it's the Idaho Judicial Cases of Interest page where Judge Hippler posts, you know, the scheduling order or the notice of a hearing. That's where you get that info. Yeah, like here, let me show you real quick. I'll show you. Let me pull this up for you guys. Okay, so on the Idaho Judicial Cases of Interest page. So let me do that. Okay, so these are all the filings. All right, so they're in chronological. So the most recent ones are at the bottom, right? So like, for example, like I covered this the other day, but just to show you an example. So like, this is what I do, right? And so I open that up and then blah, blah, right? And so this is how, you know, you have to just, you have to look at this stuff. So, you know, what does it say? It says, oh my God, I keep clicking out. Okay, there we go. So right here, this is what I was just referencing, right? So the closed sealed hearing on the 21st, right? And then just consider what portions, if any, and under what circumstances should the various motions set to be heard on the 23rd and 24th be open to the public, either live or by video. That's how you, that's, you know, yeah, this is the link, is Idaho Judicial Cases of Interest. So hopefully that helps. Oh, because you're trying to keep, I see why you're asking. Yeah, to keep it up. Gotcha. Yeah. This is then, if that's, this is the way to do it. This is the way to do it. Yep. This is the way to do it. So one thing you'll want to think of, right, to keep up in terms of the calendar, on the 21st, we will learn what the dealio is for the 23rd and 24th. If, you know, should any of it be closed or whatever. So on the 21st, we will hear what's going to happen with that. So yeah, you're very welcome. And so for Bri, oh, right. Okay. Totally agree about that. Right. The ARCA guys should have exhibits. Right. Yeah. I know. I totally agree. Right. That would be very helpful for sure. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I can't remember. So were you all saying that she didn't let them do any of that? That's right. Yeah, she didn't let them do any of that. Like for the trial or the Daubert hearing. It's so interesting because all of those decisions that she's made, right? Because, you know, those decisions don't make any sense. And all those decisions that she made that were hampering the defense. The problem is now that with this retrial, right? If the Commonwealth does bring in experts, like actual experts, the problem is now it would have to pertain to them too, right? Or, I mean, I guess, or it's just hard to imagine like the level of bias, right? Because anyway, just like she made those decisions maybe without being able to think far enough into the future, like obviously without the foresight, right? Like what if there's a retrial and the Commonwealth actually has actual experts, and like what if this decision ends up being a problem because now I have to make it the same for them, right? If that makes any type of sense. So yeah, it'll be really interesting, right? Yep, keep check. Yep, you just got to refresh that. But, you know, I'm constantly always talking about when the next things are coming up for that as well too. You know, I don't have like a calendar posted, but, you know, I refresh that thing all the time. So, you know, for documents and hearings, obviously. So yeah, but, yeah, it'll be interesting, right? Like you know, like for example, if Kenny Kinsey or somebody else, right, comes in for the Commonwealth, like, and wants to have exhibitees, right, or data or whatever, and Judge Bev, and it would help the Commonwealth, but now what's Judge Bev going to do? You know what I mean? It'll be interesting. And the spinny wheel. Oh, okay. Sorry, just real quick. So I'm just trying to help out Super Planner Girl. So for further out than that, okay. I didn't see this comment before. Let me just show you this real quick. So the best thing you can do for further out is this. Wait, hold on. For further out is go to the top. Okay, right here. Hopefully you're still here, Superman. Go to the top where it says case summary. And again, it's going to be in like chronological order. Oh, why is it 67 freaking pages? Oh my God. Yeah, you have 67 pages and you have to go to page 66 basically, right? Like page 66 is the stuff that is, oh, you can't see this. I'm an idiot. Sorry. So I went, oh my God. So I went to the case summary. Hopefully you saw me click that. I went to case summary and I'm on page 66 out of 67. And you can see here. So here's January 2025. Let me zoom in. January 2025. These are not links you can click on, right? And then it has the upcoming hearings like on here for further out, right? So and then, like canceled, right? But like the next, so in other words, the next thing after the 23rd and the 24th, right? Again, see that's not on here. You have to read the documents to get to that. But the 24th, the next thing is April the 3rd, right here, motion hearing 9 a.m. And then April the 16th, April the 16th motion hearing. So you can see those right there in bold. There you go. That's the calendar of hearings. But again, there could be changes and, but yeah, this gives you a layout. So hopefully that's helpful.
That's my opinion.
And in your opinion, based on these very significant mirror images and accidentals and that sort of thing, is that most likely that specific tire tread that's on the back?
It is most likely that tire. If it's not that tire, it's a similar tire with the same tread design.
And that particular tire was in close proximity to where Maggie was found.
In close proximity.
Looking at how you had Maggie in that first shot, I think you had me kind of angled a little bit like that. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And if she was angled that way near that front tire, would she be facing towards the feed room?
Yes, sir.
All right. And are those two shots that were suffered in the abdomen and the thigh, are those consistent with the shooter coming from the direction of the feed room?
Certainly could be. Yes, sir.
All right, go ahead and have a seat for me if you would. Sure, I'll have you back up. All right. Additionally, with this particular tire tread impression on the back of Maggie's calf, is that consistent with her running into it or backing up into it with her calf hitting that tire as it was parked there?
Leading, I've not, this is my first leading objection on this, but I object leading.
I would say so. All right.
Amazing to think about, right? Like all this time, there were no objections. That was another one of the rarities, right? Remember how I said there were so many differences? One of them, there were very few objections. There's so many things that were like obviously objectionable that no one objected. And it's just like, yeah, there you go. That reminded me, just hearing that objection, I was like, wow, this is entire time, right? No objections yet.
Let me ask you this. With this particular tire impression and what you see on Maggie's calf, is there a reasonable explanation as to how that impression got on her calf?
At some point in time, Miss Maggie Murdaugh's left calf made contact with the inside of that front driver's side tire or one just like it. And I saw no evidence that she was run over. So she had to make contact at some point in time.
Gotcha. All right. Hold on for me 1 second. I've just got a few more matters.
Love Creighton.
All right, I'm going to show you and want you to be careful. This one will be under seal. So can we secure the monitors, please? I'm going to show you what's been marked as 542 and see if you recognize this image.
I do.
All right, and just generally tell the jury what that is.
It's a cell phone sitting up on the back right-hand side pocket of the victim, Paul Murdaugh.
All right. Your Honor, this time I'd move stage 542 into evidence under seal.
Okay, Your Honor.
That's admitted.
All right, are the monitors secured? And I'm going to put this image up on the screen. All right, and again, is this your understanding of how Paul's phone was found at the crime scene?
It is.
All right. And did you make any assessment or analysis of whether or not Paul's phone could have popped out and be found in that position?
I did.
All right, and can you relate that to the jury, please?
It's my opinion that his phone was placed there by someone else.
All right, and tell the jury your basis for that conclusion, please.
Well, after I mentioned the fatality, the fatal shot, at that point in time, you have no movement, even involuntary movement, and there's no way Paul could have retrieved that phone from his pocket and placed it on top the back of his pants.
And in your opinion, if he had been carrying that in his hand, could it have landed in that fashion following the fatal shot he suffered to his head?
Mathematically, you could have made it happen, but I don't believe it's possible. I believe the phone would have fell to the ground and it wouldn't have fell behind him up in the air and landed on him.
You know what is interesting? We were just talking about this last night with John O'Keefe, right? Remember we were talking about the phone being underneath him? And I think I actually referenced Murdaugh with that too. I think I even, I know there were a lot of things that would be brought up, but I don't remember if it was that specifically, but thinking about the location of the phone, right? We were just talking about this and how we never learned specifically where under John O'Keefe the phone was and how, anyway, another crazy overlap, right? Or similarity. Interesting. And I will say that we cracked the case in terms of the phone whenever we broke this down with the chicken business, as we called it, that, Alex would have placed it there, but we broke down how all that happened specifically. So yeah.
A couple other things. You testified about your experience in crime scene and that sort of thing. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Is there any forensic value in a residence belonging to certain family members and doing any sort of DNA swabs of the bathroom sink or the shower drain or anything like that?
If it's an unknown person, maybe, but not if someone lives there. I see very little forensic value in that.
And why is that? Can you explain that to the jury?
Because we as humans, we swap, we lose biological material every day. We brush our teeth, or we should. We brush our teeth and we shampoo and we wash, and there's commonly blood and other bodily fluids in our drains, in our tub drains, and generally everywhere except in the toilet bowl. Generally, yes, sir, under black light.
You've talked about your experience and your certifications with firearms. Is that correct?
Karen Reed.
Yes, sir.
Do you own yourself any AR style platform rifles?
I have 7 complete rifles, and I also own a couple strip lowers that I'm just holding for a rainy day.
Gotcha. And what are those chambered in?
223 556.
In the AR platform, is that the most common chambering for an AR platform?
I believe it is. Yes, sir.
Do you personally own a 300 blackout?
I do not, but I have trained and shot a 300 blackout.
And why do you have 223 instead of 300 blackouts?
The cartridges were a little bit more difficult. Well, they were a lot more difficult to find during COVID, and they are a lot more expensive than 223 and 556.
300 blackout pretty loud?
I think they're all loud. Yes, sir. I have to wear hearing protection around my rifles. 300 blackout louder than the shotgun? Absolutely. I don't wear hearing protection when I hunt. I'm an avid hunter, but I have to wear hearing protection with my rifle.
Hold on for me 1 second.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have to go to the jury room for a break. Please do not discuss the case.
To Creighton and see if he wants to come on the show. That would be the best day of my life. And that, is an understatement. So they're having a little bit of a break. So let's hop right on forward here.
Crime Network, our coverage.
Very, very severe firearms injuries.
They're
One was
replaying his testimony. Okay, hold on. Let's see. Where does he come back? Okay, now we're on to top.
So,
So there's Poot.
So do I call you doctor or deputy or chief or what?
I have been a deputy in about 25 years, Mr. Harpoon, but I'll answer to whatever you call me, sir.
You may regret that. So, you've been, when did you start in law school?
Around 93.
And you were in Orangeburg?
Yes, sir.
Back then, I was a solicitor in the Fifth Circuit. I was the prosecutor there. Do you remember that?
I've testified for you a couple times, Mr. Harpoon.
I thought you looked familiar. So you actually were my witness a couple times?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I don't know if we're going to have much to do today, but I'm going to try to understand a couple of things, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
So let's understand the wound to Paul, the two wounds to Paul. And as I understand it, you were saying that he was standing how far back when he got shot, struck at? For his bloody footprints to be there, those footprints had to be made after he had the shot in the chest, correct?
That is correct. Yes, sir.
And so how far back in the room were those footprints?
The footprints are approximately, because I have no way, once everything was pressure washed and cleaned out, but looking at the actual crime scene photographs and then taking my own measurements, the placard, the yellow placard that's in the photographs is approximately at 5 foot. And he was on the other side of, so he was occupying that 6 foot area.
And there were no scales in any of those pictures, were there?
There were not, no, sir.
Let me just talk about this generally before we get to that. You teach a course on crime scene processing?
Yes, sir.
You teach a course on how one should photograph a crime scene?
Yes, I do. And imagine if he was asked these questions.
I'm going to try to oversimplify this. There's basically 2 or 3 things that you want on any crime scene photo. The first is a scale, correct?
Well, there's 3 types of photos. One of those includes a scale. Yes, sir.
Okay. I mean, obviously you don't have a scale. It's a long shot out, like from outside the
Kinsey, would you ever collect
but
evidence
for something
of
like
solo cups?
bloody footprints, you would want a scale.
I would. Yes, sir.
And you'd want multiple lighting sources so that it's well lit.
Well, if you operate the camera correctly, you have your light source. And that's why you do it from 90 degrees over perpendicular to the footprint, because you can hit all the angles and then choose the best exposure that takes those shadows out.
So if you do 90, do you recommend taking more than one shot?
Yes, sir. Typically.
I mean, at different perspectives of the same height?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you recommend multiple shots, including one, got to have 190 degree.
If you're getting for comparison evidence, you do. Yes, sir.
And in the sense of the shoes, the shoe prints you think you saw, they were definitely Paul's shoes. You did that comparison.
Just like with the tire tread, they share class characteristics with Paul's shoes.
Were those shoes facing towards the front or the back of the face?
When they were made, it appears they were going toward the door. Right. But it would be hard for me to tell you without some kind of mark on that pavement to be able to orient them.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear that.
Without a mark on the pavement or some type of landmark, it would be hard for me to orient them from the photograph.
Okay. And again, if you had a scale or multiple pictures of that one shot, I mean, straight down and multiple pictures, you could have done a little bit more in terms of that, could you not?
An examiner possibly could have, yes, sir.
And the trail of blood leads towards the front door, right?
It does.
And how long was that trail?
Well, if he was in the 6 foot and you got 4 past him, at least 5 foot from where he starts dripping blood, then he steps in it, and then he makes his way to the door.
So you think he was a foot and a half inside the door when he got shot in the second shot?
Well, his feet were inside the door, but his shoulder and his head was slightly outside the door.
Leaning forward?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so the first shot, as I understand it, hit his shoulder.
The second shot is the one that hit the shoulder.
No, I'm talking about, let's talk about
the fatal one.
The fatal one.
Yes, sir.
It hit his shoulder.
Yes, sir.
So based on, and you met with Dr. Reamer, the pathologist.
I did.
And she showed you her photos. Y'all talk about her photos?
I offered to go over the photos with Dr. Reamer, and she told me that she had limited crime scene experience, and that I'd have to determine that she looked at the wounds and she makes her determinations, and that wasn't really her forte.
Okay, so, but she said shot in the shoulder. I'm talking about the fatal shot.
The path, yes, sir.
Into the neck, not the top of the head.
That is correct.
Okay, so, and how, you said you had some difficulty in determining Paul's height.
Well, the DMV record, the printout showed 5'6", and the autopsy information showed 5'9", and I know a young man like that will hit a growth spurt. That's not my area.
But would you consider Dr. Reamer's measurement probably more accurate than what he told the DMV?
Or he could have grown since he registered with the DMV. Yes, sir.
So why wouldn't we just use 5'9"? So, I mean, is that fair?
Well, but then he's got damage to the top of his head. So I asked myself, how could Dr. Reamer get it exactly right when the top portion of his head's gone? So I had to guesstimate, and I figured the best way to do it is split the two.
And the two were, so you had him at what height?
DMV showed 5'6" on the printout, and Dr. Reamer showed 5'9". So I figured somewhere around 5'7.5" to 5'8".
So 5'7.5".
And then you take the foot from there to the actual wound.
Right, I guess. So where the wound occurs, the initial I guess it's his shoulder.
Yes, sir.
How high was that?
That was approximately 4/7.
4/7.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So let's give me a second here. We're going to do it. I hadn't touched a protractor in 50 years. I've done it twice this week. So let's do, if you step down here for just a minute, please. Oh, you walk around with one?
Yes, sir.
Really sad. Really, really sad. So why don't you take this for me and I'm going to hold it. I'll hold the bottom and put a dot on here at 4, wherever the shoulder, the height of the shoulder. Okay, straight. Look at them. Okay. Okay. Let me just get it up here to 4. Let me do this. I think we can do this one. 4 foot 6. We're saying 4'7"?
Yes, sir.
You know, a lot.
This is where Poot struggles quite a bit with the
Okay. So that's
geometry.
4'7", right? Yes, sir. Okay, let's go straight up. Okay. And that was been the height of the woman.
That's the height, approximate height of the shoulder, depending on how far he's getting.
You think it's lower?
Could be, yes, sir. Like I said, when you got a room to that side, I would expect him to be favoring that shoulder.
Okay. So what's your opinion of how, I mean, you're the professional, I'm just holding.
Well, looking at the defects on this side of the door,
Yeah.
and it's several of them there, even though they've been pressure washed, if I run a string back in the area of 4'7", somewhere maybe 135 degree angle, that's give or take 5 or 6 degrees.
And that's what Dr. Reamer said in her report, 135 degrees.
I don't know if she said that in her report, sir.
Yes. Thank you. Give me 2 seconds.
But that's not absolute. Like I said, a lot of variables could change that a couple of degrees one way or
Couple
another.
of degrees. Make sure that's right. There we go. So.
He's trying to match.
So while I'm looking for this, was there any evidence of stippling, soot, powder burn, anything? Anything powder burn?
Soot is byproduct, yes, sir.
Okay. Around
But
it.
soot can wipe off. The powder burn and stippling doesn't easily wipe off. This actually technique.
And that would indicate a pretty close shot.
Yes, sir.
And you would agree, Dr. Reamer said there was no evidence of any of that, any stippling, anything that indicates a close-in shot.
That is accurate.
And she testified, I don't know if you saw her, did you see her testify?
A little bit of it.
Okay. She testified that the muzzle of the gun, the weapon, the shotgun, would have had to been at least 3 feet away, perhaps 4, but at least 3 feet away. Is that consistent with your experience?
I don't know if that's consistent with my experience. I'm not trying to disagree with the pathologist, but I don't see how the angle would work out.
I know, great
Unless
point.
it's a pretty
Great
short
point.
shotgun.
I
I
know.
don't see the angle
Yep.
working out 3 feet away.
Didn't-
It may be
never,
that
not
it was
once.
10 feet away.
Well, and how far away was it? There was no, I mean, at what point?
Well, at the angle, the bullet defects would have been here at 76 inches.
Right.
So you've got quite a difference there. If I could get that dowel. You want to swap places with me?
Yeah, I'm trying to find that 135 degrees on in my bird, but
To make that axis,
yeah,
at 3 foot, we're here.
right.
At 2 foot, we're here. So I believe it would be more in line with 2 foot, but I'm not contradicting a pathologist.
Okay. I know it's in here. Give me 2 seconds. I thought I had it marked.
Oh, you got it marked.
Give me 1 more second here. Well, so assume that you said, and you relied on Dr. Reamer's 135 degree shot. Let's follow that down.
Now, Ms. Harpootlian, I reviewed her stuff, but I went and measured my own angle on that door. Now, I didn't rely on her angle.
Well, but she actually, you're going based on where those pellets were.
Yes, sir.
And she would be going on measurements on the shoulder.
Yes, sir.
And she's actually looking at the wound.
Yes, sir.
And she would have maybe a more accurate angle because she sees what the wound is.
She knows the angle to him,
Right.
but she can't relate that to the defect at the scene.
But do you think it's, I mean, 135 degrees is basically a 45-degree angle, correct?
Not quite, but yes, sir, close. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So it's 45 degrees off of that dot.
I did my measurement from a little bit lower on the door frame. I took my protractor and placed it on the door frame, inside the door frame also.
So you don't think it's that tall? You think it's down?
Well, that's where his shoulder's at, but the angle of the gun, depending on the length of the barrel,
Right.
it would have to be here because it's not a contact wound. So it would have to be down a little bit, but the angle doesn't change, just the distance changes.
Right. So, but if you come off of this 45 degrees for the sake of argument.
Okay, for the sake of argument.
Okay. That would show you an angle of whatever hit his shoulder.
As long as the angle stays the same, yes, sir.
Okay. So the angle.
I got it on 135, by the way.
But 135 would be.
Oh,
Should
boy.
be 45 degrees off
Oh,
of
boy.
straight up and down. So don't you have to take it over this way?
Well, you've got 90 in the middle. It depends on where your axis is. You've got 90 in the middle. This is 180. All the way around is 360. So here we've got 135 off. the
Here is to try to make it seem
Going that
like
way.
the fall
Can you make it go this way?
bottom.
I don't quite understand.
I want the line not going this way. I want to be able to draw it out this way.
You just flip it
There you go.
and you go above it.
Okay, would you do me a favor? And let me get a ruler for you. Can I have that long ruler, please? And let's take it. Just, I'll hold it. That. He'll just get that. Okay. And so,
Absolutely, Top Cat.
and again, it could be
Absolutely.
somewhat
Yep.
lower. If you turn,
Yes, sir.
but so
And that would change the angle. That's why I said approximately 135. It could change it a little bit.
how much?
30 degrees. As if you figure if this is 135 and if he's 2 inches lower, that would, take probably 5 degrees off.
So that would be 130.
Maybe if you sit it up there, we'll measure it. I can take it for sure.
Okay. So, okay, what do you want me to do?
You hold the protractor up. There you go.
So you gotta go this way. No,
Okay. You got it. There you go.
but you ain't gonna go that way.
Which way you want to go?
I want to
Flip it. Flip it. There you
Okay,
go.
there we go. See what? That's why you're the.
No, I got a feeling you flew with me, Mr. Harper.
You got that feeling?
I got that feeling.
Okay. So that's 130.
Yes, sir.
What do you want to make it?
Well, I'm not measuring it this way. I mean, you tell me what you want me to make it because I measured it this angle.
Yeah, but this is just a flip side of that. Remember how you're talking about the negative?
All right, put it back.
Okay. Which way you want it? This? That?
There you
Okay,
go.
that's 135. What do you want?
So you can-
Oh, wow. There you go.
All right, so if it was, let's say this end
There
was
you
down a
go,
little bit, that would make it what? Now you're on the bottom half now, so that changes it. Now we're at 40.
Yeah, it was 45.
Right.
Now it's 40.
Right.
See, I went to Clemson too.
Yeah.
And so, this is sad. So if you make it 40 instead of 45 degrees, what is it?
Here.
Okay, so. Okay, you want to draw that in? And wait on the.
Nah, that's not intentional.
Okay, so those are basically, what you're saying is those are the two possible paths and then maybe one in the middle.
It could be. Yes, sir.
Now,
Great.
and you believe that the shooter was how far away from him with that shotgun?
I think 3 foot is a stretch without having some damage to the door frame.
Right.
Because them shot pellets immediately when they leave the barrel of that gun, at 3 foot, that shot pellet's going to spread 1 inch. There's no damage to the outside of that door frame.
Why would there be?
Why would there be what?
If it's spread how far, 1 inch?
If Paul's shoulder is barely reaching that door frame, and that's what the blood evidence tells you.
Right.
If you are further back, them shot pellets are going to do what they're supposed to do. They're going to open up, and there's no shot damage to that door frame.
Okay.
So
You recognize it?
yes, I'm from photograph.
Oh,
And it's a
boy.
Benelli shotgun, is that right?
Yes, sir, it is.
Okay,
Is this
so-
the moment where he points to the prosecutor?
I prefer to point those. I have some.
Oh my God. Poot didn't take any gloves. Look at this. So Poot got a shotgun.
Okay, so you take that shotgun and, unlike these boys back here, I don't mind if you point it in my direction. Okay,
Oh my God.
so if you take that, the muzzle of that gun and follow the line down, please. And let me turn this just a little bit so
Oh,
you're
here we go. With
Okay,
hitter.
follow this down, either one of those down. So that would be the position the shooter had?
That's the angle. And I'm on the opposite side, of where the shot came from, and I don't know the length of the barrel, but that would be the angle.
If I'm standing in the door, why is that the opposite side? Bent down a little bit. I don't understand what you mean by the opposite side.
The shot came from over here. It didn't come
Well, this is
from.
a two-dimensional representation of a three-dimensional, but I'm trying to figure out just the angle from the muzzle.
All right, if you're coming out of the door,
Right.
and you got damage to your right shoulder.
Right, there you go.
Instead of your left shoulder.
Same.
All right, turn this way.
Okay,
And that is the door frame.
right,
Was here.
right. But and that distance there is how far from the barrel?
2.5 to 3 foot.
That's just a feet.
So in the
So
bottom
actually, that is,
you can
I'm going to your shoulder now.
okay.
You gotta turn. You gotta turn. Yeah, you gotta turn.
So that is about 24 inches.
Well, you step closer, but yes, sir, about 24 inches.
Again, we both want the constant. Okay, so this is getting complicated. So what you're saying is, whoever shot him was holding the shotgun that low?
Really low. Yes, sir. Not from the shoulder. From some position other than the shoulder.
Why? Wouldn't it be easier just to go boom right in the head?
Right. I can't figure out why people do what they do.
I guess, okay, so the person with the shotgun had just shot him in the chest, and he would have been turned to the left. And that would have gone through.
So this was a big thing in this trial, right? The fact that that second shot was made from such a low position that it would not have been like a shooting position, right? So
His armpit out the window.
Right.
Okay. And then he shuffles over to the right of that position.
Towards the door.
Towards the door. And then whoever's just shot him, you would agree with me, the first shot was inside the, the shooter would have been inside the feed room for shot number
At
one.
least to here. If this is the door frame,
Right.
the ejection port of that shotgun was in at least this far.
And how far back was he in the room when he got shot?
Paul?
Yeah.
Just on the other side of the 5 foot mark.
Okay, so how far would it be from that 5 foot mark to the door frame?
5 foot.
Yeah, no, but I mean, how far would the barrel have been if that was just inside?
Well, it depends on the length of the shotgun.
As soon as that's Benelli, whatever
Well,
the name.
if this represents 5 foot,
Right.
and I've got the ejection port inside the door, what, 2 foot? I mean, you don't want to do it, but 2 foot maybe?
It's going to move this way, it's even with me. I said, can't do. Thank you. So this is 5 feet.
I don't know what to do, but this is the door. It'd be easy to measure.
This is that. 6 feet.
So if
So
this,
that's 5 feet.
for demonstrative purposes, if it's this gun, and that reaches inside, so that's what? How far? I can see.
I'm 5 feet.
Okay, and step just a little bit behind 5 foot,
Okay.
because he's occupying that next foot. There you go. So how far is that?
This is 5 feet.
Okay.
This is a little bit back from
Yes, sir.
5 feet.
Now, can you answer body?
This way?
Yes, sir.
This way. Okay. What do you need? Turn my feet?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
A little bit more.
Okay.
Right there.
Okay. Now, and you're shooting me in the chest.
Yes, sir.
And the distance between that barrel and my chest is nice.
Where's that come from?
This is 29, 30 inches. 30 inches. 30 inches. That's what this estimate, 30 inches.
Yeah, with this shotgun.
Okay, right. And so I would get, I mean, just a minute ago, we said at 36 inches, or you said maybe it was closer. I mean, is this consistent with Stiflin?
Yes, sir. Within 5 foot. Yes, sir.
Okay. And when we had it to 4 and he was shooting up at me, it was about the same distance, maybe six more inches between the barrel and me, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's no stippling.
Okay.
Okay. You're the expert. What does that mean?
Well, he also has, I don't know. I can't answer that.
Could it be? Well, I mean, on that first shot, we know, you say that he was, whatever you call it, what's it called? The ejection port. There you go. Well, the ejection port had to be inside the room.
Yes, sir. Well, the second shot, now all it had to be is pointed towards the room.
Why?
Because it's going to eject to the right. So if this is the door frame and I've got the ejection port pointed toward the room, it's going to eject into the room. The first shot, because it was straight on, had to be at least past the door frame.
Right. But the second shot, if the ejection port was pointed towards the
I could
room.
be this far away from the door, the second shot, and the ejection port would still throw it that direction.
So doesn't that change the calculation here on how far away that gun was? Because the ejection port on.
So Top Cat asking another great question. Didn't he stumble backwards? Yes. So there's a couple things, right? So after that first shot with the shotgun, there would have been like the blowback or whatever, that could have pushed, made him stumble a little bit. But also he was in that door frame. There was a step there. And then also my thought is that, that there was also a lot of water. We know there was a lot of water. I think the hose was still running. And so between it being wet, and then adding in the blowback of the first shot and then the step, right? All of that would explain that he stumbled backwards. There's also the thought too that he didn't expect Paul to still be alive. And that it surprised him that Paul was still walking towards him. And so he wasn't planning on making another shot. But as soon as he saw that happening and he stumbled back, and then that would put him at that weird position. So yeah.
On this, is that a kind of word? There it is right there. The ejection port is, who you disagree with me, about 28 inches from the barrel.
On that shotgun? Yes, sir.
Let's assume this was a possible shotgun, although it doesn't match up with the ejector mark on the shells found in the there's some theory that this would be about the same shotgun. So you would agree with me
I agree with him.
that the shooter would have been, how about show me again how low they would have been holding this?
So this whole thing with the height is where you get into the theory when it gets to the defense's case in chief about the 5'2", 11-year-old shooters.
Other side, but here.
Down.
Well, I mean, I don't know how long the arms are. There's a lot of variables there, but it could have been here. It could have been here. I mean, I can't tell you the mechanics of it. All I can look at is the angle.
And that angle, you would agree with me, is an unusual angle. Typically, people shoot a shotgun from their shoulder.
Typically, unless you and I are both occupying nearly the same space,
wouldn't there be stippling or powder burn or something?
I can't explain that.
Well, okay, so you can explain it. I'll take that answer. Yes, sir. But it would be inconsistent for them to be that close, wouldn't it?
Well, you figure if Paul made it to the door, whoever fired the first shot could have retreated or could have backed up, better word for it, could have backed up or even was taking cover to see what was going to happen. And then I believe the angle would fit or could fit that two persons could be that close to that door frame.
Tell me what again, please. Might want to shut that way. Well, I'll be blocking the dirt. That's better. So we both agree that the first shot is square into his chest.
Well, I mean, it's square, but it's directly on. Yes,
okay, which is at shoulder height. Boom.
Well, it could have been shoulder height. It could have been like I was holding this now. No.
22, right? Kenny Kinsey has gloves on. Poot doesn't have gloves. And he just keeps handling that.
Before. I mean,
I'm sorry.
It could have been. It could have been here. It could have been here. I mean, I can't tell you the mechanics.
Whoever shooting into the chest is holding it
parallel to the ground or near parallel to the ground. Yes, sir.
And we know what down here.
I don't believe so. No, sir. Not the path of the bullets going out the back window.
Okay.
The pellets. Not
so either at shoulder or just under shoulder. Now, shotgun has pretty good kick to it, doesn't it? Buckshot?
Yes, it's pretty decent.
So I guess what I don't understand, and you have no explanation for it, is why the second shot would be like this. I mean, we agree the normal height person would have to crouch to make that shot. Correct?
I don't know where they want to get into that barrel place, Mr. Harpoon. I can't tell you that part with my science. I can't. All I can look at is the angle.
Which is about like this.
Well, that's here, but in reverse.
Which is about like this, correct? The barrel would have to be, okay, like that. But you would agree with me, I'm bent over to do that.
You are, yes, sir.
So the shooter was a very short person?
But here, I'm not bent over
There it
that
is.
far, and I'm almost 6 foot.
Right.
So what, I don't understand. You go ahead and take a seat. I don't understand what circumstance would cause a person to, I want to do that a little bit, to do this or this, and then immediately do this or do this to
Stumbling.
put that second shot in.
Objection, asked and answered.
You said what you don't understand. The question is,
The question is that your position is that the first shot was like this. The second shot would have been like, if I'm standing up straight like this, not a very good aim, or crouched down. If it's a normal sized person, right?
The first angle was almost parallel with the ground.
Right.
The second angle was somewhere between somewhere around 135 degrees from the door frame. I can't tell you the psychology of any more or any less.
Okay, so what height was the entrance wound on that chest?
On the chest?
Yeah.
Approximately 4'3" or 4'4", I believe, according to the
4'3".
Yeah, 4'3", 4'4".
Because that would have been below the shoulder wound, right?
Yes, sir.
So it'd be, let me see how that works. This will help us. Two, 3, 4, 4 foot. You think 4'3"?
I'm fairly certain. Yes, sir.
Trust me, that's 4'3".
I believe, yeah.
Okay, I'm about 5'10" on a good day. So that would be about right for me, wouldn't it?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that first shot, if it was on that person's shoulder, if they put it on their shoulder, they would have been approximately, was there any way to figure out?
I don't know a scientific way, Mr. Harpoon, unless you had a tripod that you could hold the gun and shoot it many times, the actual gun, and measure it. I don't know the scientific. If it is one, it's way out of my purview. I look at the angle, and I look at the damage, and I develop my angles. That's what I do.
Okay. Okay, I think I'm done with the gun. You can have a seat.
Can I take the gloves off, or we can do this again?
Objection, asked and answered. I think we're done with the gun, but I gotta tell you.
Right, yeah.
So, I don't think I need this anymore, Mr. Barber, I'm sorry. Were you able to find what I wanted? Yes. Where is it? Okay, so let me go a couple other places with you. You were hired on December 22nd?
I think it was in November when I first got to review the evidence, and I think I was hired in October. I can't tell you the actual date on my retainer, but it was several weeks after that before I ever got access to evidence.
Okay, so you read a crime scene reconstruction done by a guy named Dowel from Oklahoma, did you not?
I did read that, yes, sir, but I did not depend on that to make my determinations.
No, I'm just saying.
Okay, yes, sir.
For purposes
I did
of-
review that, yes, sir.
Okay, and do you remember when he generated his report?
I don't, Mr. Harpoon.
Would it surprise you if he generated it in 2022, early? Several months before you even asked, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And you were their second choice?
I don't know if I was their second choice. I was a choice.
Okay. Let me make sure I understand the date of Mr. Bevel's report. So he issued a report in March of 2022, and you were not asked to get involved until October of 2022.
I had a phone call shortly.
Dowel was the guy that messed up the whole thing with the blood spatter on the T-shirt, and he was a disaster.
After,
So they didn't use him.
I don't remember who I talked with, but someone called me shortly after the homicides and asked me if I would mind taking a look at stuff, and I said I'm always available to help if I can.
Okay. Now, The other things that you looked at, let me just make sure we understand what you looked at. You had a David Green recording of June 7th, 2021. You remember looking at that?
Body camera, yes, sir.
Right. And in that body camera interview, when they talked to Mr. Murdaugh, he indicates the phone had fallen out of Paul's pocket when he tried to check his pulse, and he put it on. It didn't explode out of anywhere. He put it on that picture that you introduced just a moment ago. He put it on his rear end. Correct?
It may have said that in the body
Okay.
camera.
So there was no exploding out of any pocket, right?
I don't believe it did, and that's what I said. Someone other than Paul put it there.
Yeah, Alex said popped out.
Okay. Now you had a SLED crime scene investigator summary. Was that by Agent Worley?
I read several SLED reports, but Agent Worley's report was one of them. Yes, sir.
Okay, you digested everything in that report that was relevant to your inquiry?
I read those reports just so I have the knowledge of it, but what I can work out on my own, even if it contradicts their results, I like to make my own.
For instance,
conclusion.
she had
This is why he's so credible.
very distinct
Right
measurement.
there, he's saying that he reads the reports, but he doesn't rely on it. Law enforcement, right? Because he wants to come to his own conclusions.
On shell casing location, right?
Yes, sir. I believe that.
And you relied on that, certainly, in looking at shell casing placement.
When you say shell casing, are you
I'm
talking
talking about where the Blackout 300 shell casings were.
I looked at the path. I did not look at the measurement per se because, like I said, the shooter moving, the victim moving, not having the rifle and be able to say exactly where it throws that shell casing, I don't get too involved with that. I'll look at the general path where they're at. But as far as so many feet, so many inches, I don't pay a lot of attention to that.
And I'm not asking you that, but it would show you the path of the shooter, would it not?
Well, like I said earlier in my testimony, it could or it may not. You can't look and say a shooter started here and ended here because he might have went from here to here and back to here. So
Well, let me rephrase that. Not necessarily the path, but at least you would know generally where the shooter was during, if you look at the coagulation of all those shots. For instance, what we see, if you remember correctly, is a number of these shell casings. There's one sort of back on the gravel road, and then all of the rest of them are located in a fairly small area on the grass. And then there's one under her, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. That would show you, at least generally, I mean, the one under her had to have been a shot that was fired while she was upright and fell on it, correct?
I would agree with that assessment.
Okay. But give you some general idea where the shooter was. General idea. Not
General idea, somewhere within 5 foot, 5 or 6 foot, knowing what I know about those rifles, it's not going to throw it 20 foot or 30 foot. It's going to be confined to that area. And all I can do is probably put a general perimeter within, a couple yards at the most from Miss Maggie Murdaugh.
Did you look at the autopsy report?
I did, yes, sir.
And the autopsy report, Dr. Reamer indicated the angle of the shot, we talked this to death, was 135 degrees.
I really wasn't aware of that, but I look at the photos more than the report part.
Okay, hold on 1 second here. Let me see if I have it. Let me ask them to find something. So let me ask you what else you looked at. And you list a bunch of things here. You looked at lab photos of victims' clothing, trace reports, DNA, CS. What's CS photos? Evidence processing. What's CS mean?
Crime scene. Yes,
okay. So you looked at the crime scene photos. There were 449 of those, or at least the ones that were relevant to your look, what you were looking at, right?
Yes, sir.
A number of interviews with people, right?
I had access to it. I may have looked at some of them. Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, let me ask you this. Does the wound on Paul's shoulder indicate to you how far the shooter was? I mean, what was the spread at that point?
Your typical full choke on a shotgun, and it depends. Once again, it depends on the choke.
Right.
At 3 foot, it's going to spread 1 inch.
Okay. Well,
with an improved choke at 3 foot, it's going to spread 1.75 inches. So I don't know the.
Well, you looked at the autopsy photos, right?
I did. Yes, sir.
Was the wound on his shoulder bigger than 1 or 1.75?
It's a massive wound. I mean, it's massive, but a lot of that can be taken into the angle too, Mr. Harpootlian.
Did you look at the x-rays?
I did. Yes, sir.
And there's a whole bunch of pellets in his shoulder.
Along the path. Yes,
along
sir.
the path. Mm-hmm. But wouldn't it indicate that the spread of those pellets is significantly more than 1 inch or 2 inches? like, I think we determined it was about a 6-inch spread.
Well, I don't think with the angle, it would be possible for someone to be 12 yards away and shooting up that direction. So obviously that's got something to do with the close proximity and the way those number twos work.
So, do you have an explanation for why the spread would have been that big based on what we just did? I don't want to pull the shotgun out.
I'm not a firearms examiner, Mr. Harpootlian. I'm just familiar with how they work.
And so your position is that spread is not inconsistent with what you've
I
testified?
do not believe so. I have had people shoot themselves in front of me, and I have worked a number of crime scenes where I've seen the same damage.
Okay. So, okay, here we go. I knew I'd seen it somewhere.
Oh my
This is your
God. Scoop, get it together.
Thank you.
Okay. Let me ask you, did you say all height of 5'8" and the sharp angle upwards, approximately 135 degrees, support that Paul's left side was dipping slightly, head slightly forward as he was standing or exiting the feed room at the time of the second shot?
I think that's what I testified to. Yes, sir. And that's still my findings.
Okay, I just want to make sure that's 135-degree thing I didn't imagine. That's what you said, right?
Well, that's what I was saying. I was hoping you didn't say I copied someone else, but yes, sir. That's my measurement.
Okay. So, you also said the length of the shotgun would be needed to a reasonable degree of certainty, but it's unlikely the shooter was standing with a shouldered weapon at the time of the second discharge. We've already established that, correct?
Yes, sir.
They would have been crouched or holding it down in some awkward position,
Yes, sir.
rather than having it up to their shoulder. Also, let me see if I can finish this. You don't have, you do, in your opinion, IQ 7. It is my opinion that the exact position of the shooter cannot be determined in relation to Margaret, correct?
Yes, sir.
Do you have the most accurate information available to narrow down the position of the shooter's position is the physical location, position of the deceased, bullet path of known wounds, stippling, or lack of physical damage caused by those wounds. So you came across no data that would allow you to determine trajectory with any degree of certainty as to Maggie.
No, because the victim and the shooter could possibly have been moving. So it's no way, to my knowledge, scientifically, to prove either one.
Okay, and I guess that was my question. My question was, you saw no data in the material you looked at that would allow you to do that.
Other than the pathologist measuring the angle of her stomach wound and her thigh wound, and they were very similar angle, that's about all I can tell you, Mr. Harpootlian.
Okay. And let me deal with a couple of issues. Let's go to the what you testified to about the impression on her leg, right?
Yes, sir.
Now, this again, was there a photo taken of either her leg or the tire that you're talking about that would have been what you would expect if you're trying to make a comparison? That is a 90-degree shot of either one.
And no, sir. And that's why I explained that I can't call this to the exclusion of all others. If I was going to make an absolute identification, I would require a scale photograph.
Right. And there's no scale in either one of those.
No, sir. But I got it close, but still not close enough for me to call. I used the scale at autopsy that the pathologist used on the back of Miss Margaret Murdaugh's leg. And I went and did research on the tire, and I actually know the type of tire. And the only problem is it comes in a 9, a 10, and an 11-inch front tire. So I have no way to scale that without the actual tire.
So you're not telling this jury that it's your opinion that tire caused that impression on the back of her leg?
What I'm telling the jury is that is a class. They share the same class. It's called an association. And in my opinion, either that tire or a tire just like it caused that impression.
Well, let me ask you this. By the time it got to the autopsy for leg, whatever mud was on there was washed off, right? There's no, in those autopsy photos, all you see is a bruise, correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And so the only evidence you have is that there was some mud stuck on the back of her leg with those specific details, right?
It's an impression in mud. Yes, sir.
Okay. When you looked at the tire pictures, was there any mud on them?
There are, specifically those treads. And like I pointed out earlier, you can actually see unique random characteristics. In a perfect world, if I would have had a scale myself, I would have called that all day. And my technically reviewer would have called it all day also, but I'm not allowed to do that.
You're not allowed to do that because you may be close, but you can't say with affinity that tread caused that
Dude,
defect on the
What I can say is that, in my
he's said this a million times. Oh my God.
opinion, that impression was created by that tire or a tire with similar characteristics.
Did you look at any black and white images of that what you call a tire impression, or the mark on the back of her leg?
I did. I made it black and white. Yes, sir.
What you call a tire.
So, okay, you can go round and round about how sure you are, but I'm not going to do that. Let me ask you sort of in not closing. I have a couple more shots, but a couple more questions. We'll strike that. Let me check one thing with my folks over here, and I'm probably done.
Can I stand for a moment, please? Your Honor, thank you.
What am I? Like Poot, I think it's like a bumbling buffoon. I don't know if that's some people say that could be a strategy. I don't see it being a strategy, but either way. You done? Another thing that was so awesome about Judge Newman is Judge Newman always did let's take a stand break or a stretch. He would call it like a stand break where let's all stand for a moment, which was just so cute. Yeah, he's lost the plot. Absolutely. Okay.
Yes, sir. Just real quick. Couple things real quick. You were contacted by SLED to do a review of this case. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. It was.
And were you told any particular conclusions to come to, or did you do a fresh review and arrive at your own conclusions of your own independent judgment?
Every conclusion I came to was in spite of any pre-existing conclusions. I made my own conclusions.
You're asked a little bit about the tire mark impression, and were you relying on the crime scene photographs of Maggie Murdaugh at the scene?
Yes, sir.
And did you see mud, which is the impression that you examined?
It is. Yes, sir.
And from your review of the crime scene, was there any other ATV in the vicinity of where Maggie Murdaugh was found, except that tire you looked at, the picture of it?
That's the only one I observed.
And you said it either had to be that tire or a tire with similar characteristics?
Yes, sir. That's my opinion.
On the ATV that was at the scene?
Yes, sir.
You were asked a lot about shell casings, and you pointed out that they can be thrown different feet and can move around, and shooters can move as well. Is that correct?
That is correct.
The shell casings, though, that were located, were they located in this area around the feed room as to where Maggie Murdaugh was found?
They were.
And you said them shell casings ain't gonna get thrown 30 feet, right?
No, sir. Not in my experience.
In your experience, having done 850 homicide scenes, can shooting events be fluid situations?
That's death scenes, but the answer is yes, sir.
The victims can move?
Yes, sir.
The shooter can move?
Absolutely.
People can change their aspect of how they're positioned at any given time?
Because of the moment.
What if I get to it on that easel, y'all went through the whole thing, drawing and all the rest of it? But what y'all were drawing, that was actually reversed from how everything happened. Is that correct?
It was.
And if this were the door to the feed room going out to the outside and I was standing in it, which direction was the trajectory of the shot to Paul's head?
Where I'm at, up at a 135-degree angle.
And what did you observe up here?
I observed body fluid, a concentration of body fluid as a result of a gunshot wound.
Defects in the door as well?
Absolutely.
And what's a defect? What does that
A defect is damage caused by a projectile, whether it be a pellet or a bullet.
That easel drawing y'all did, that was reversed from the reality of the situation, correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. And that easel also was slanted as well, was it not?
It was.
And if it were actually standing straight up, that dot y'all marking would actually be higher than it was when it was demonstrated to the jury. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. And that's why you use approximate, because I
Great point, Creighton.
I can't tell you how Paul was positioned. I can only go by the angle.
All that stuff that you and Mr. Harpootling there with the easel and the shotgun and all the rest of that, does any of that change your opinion about what happened to Paul on the night of June 7th, 2021, when he was fatally shot in the head?
It does not.
Thank you, Your Honor. Nothing further.
Just one additional question.
Mr. Barber, please.
Recrops. Oh, right. This is when he gets Mr. Barber to come in and help him demonstrate. Oh, boy.
We agree that what I did there a moment ago with the easel was a mirror image or a negative of what actually occurred, right?
It was the opposite side of the door. Yes, sir.
Go get the door, please.
Oh, boy.
And Mr. Barber, in the interest of justice, has allowed me.
Okay, this is the really infamous moment where Poot points the gun at the prosecution and says tempting. This went like viral.
Point the shotgun at him, Your Honor, it is. So we agree that if he's standing in the doorway, the shooter would have had the shotgun. And how about turn a little bit to your, turn that way?
No blood.
A little bit? Yes, sir. Okay, the shotgun would have been about like this.
I think it's
About like this. Yes. Okay. Okay. So that's the trajectory. That's where the barrel of the shotgun would have had to been.
In my opinion, yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Oh, yeah.
You may step down.
Everybody.
Sir.
I wonder, maybe it's with the rebuttal, which we're going to watch next. So I thought that was the moment where he takes the gun and points and says tempting. But anyway, okay. So now let me pull it up. So, you know, we don't always see, right, rebuttal cases like from the state, but there was a rebuttal. So let me pull this up. So they did have a rebuttal case. Just a second. Here we go.
Jury is present, sir.
All right, thank you. Your next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. The state calls Dr. Kinsey.
Yay! So this is the rebuttal.
Do you swear the testimony that you give today will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. You'll have a seat to adjust that microphone for me. If you'll state your name, it's still.
That's Miss Becky. Wow.
Kenneth Lee Kinsey, Kinsey.
Welcome back, Dr. Kinsey. Feels like a year since you were here.
So
You were qualified.
in case you're like, who is that? So that's the AG of South Carolina, Alan Wilson, and he is still the AG, and he sat through every single day of this trial, which is really unusual because usually they're not involved in the cases. He was there every single day of the trial, and he took this witness himself. And this is where we first hear, so, you know, the 5'2" child ninja assassins, right? We're going to hear the two gray boys. He's going to reference them as, which is really funny.
Last week as an expert, correct?
Yes, sir, that is correct.
What I would like for you to do right now is just to remind the jury, give them a little bit of background on your education, your work history, your credentials that made you qualified to be an expert witness.
Yes, sir. I've got a degree from Clemson University, a master's degree. That's undergraduate, a master's degree.
Okay, we're going to skip past his credentials because we heard that. Jury had a little bit of time in between, but we just heard it. So.
And real quick, what other types of qualifications as an expert do you?
Okay. Do-do-do-do.
Exhibit 526.
Okay.
You recognize this map?
Yes, sir, I do.
And what is it?
That's a satellite map from the Moselle property.
I would like to offer this into evidence. I assume no objection.
Submit it.
Hello. Welcome back. Glad you're here.
Dr. Kinsey, we're going to keep our testimony today narrowly focused and tailored to a few witnesses that the defense put up this past week. Did you have the opportunity to observe one witness?
The reason
named Michael Sutton, who was
the reason they entered that exhibit is actually so that they can use it in closing arguments, because this is their last chance to enter anything else in evidence.
Forensic mechanical engineer for the defense.
I did.
Now, do you recall any of his conclusions or what his
Here we go. He's trying not to laugh. Oh, this is amazing.
main conclusion was regarding the size of the shooter?
I do.
Oh boy.
What was that conclusion?
Here we go.
5'2" to 5'4".
I would like now, Doug, if you would, I would like for you to publish or cut on Defense Exhibit 140. Go to page 49. Okay, now what I want to do is we're going to get into this in just a moment, but they published this into evidence last week. And do you recognize these green lines coming out?
Yes, sir, I do.
Okay, and what do those green lines represent?
Those green lines represent a predicted static angle or,
Oh my God, this was so funny.
I don't know what you would call it, trajectory for possible shooters.
And Doug, if you would go to page 74 of this presentation, please. Do you recognize this photo on page 74 of the defense exhibit?
I do.
And what is it?
It is Mr. Sutton pointing a pump action shotgun into the feed room at Moselle.
Okay, and did Mr. Sutton develop his conclusions as to the height of the shooter based on math that he did in this particular case?
He said it was trigonometry, but yes, sir, he did.
Based on your many years of law enforcement experience, education, and training, what is your overall opinion on his conclusions?
I think his intentions are well, but I think his methods were flawed.
So what I want to do is
very gracious.
I want to go back, and there were 3 previous angles that we just looked at in the previous slide, correct?
That is correct.
And then he also determined an angle here in this photo, correct?
That is correct.
And those are the angles that he used to determine the height of the shooter, correct?
That is correct. And Mr. Wilson, I don't know the totality of what he considered, but that was one of the elements, one of the criteria he used.
Okay, just to refresh the jury's recollection, Doug, if you go to page 4, it should be state 62. It's a picture. What is that a picture of?
That is a picture of what's been described as a quail pen.
Well,
go to page 5, please. And what is that a picture of?
That is a close-up of that quail pen, and it has weathered cardboard on one end.
Okay, and that, for the record, is exhibit 63 that is a picture of. And go to page 6, which should be state 64. And what is that a picture of?
That is a close-up of what appears to be a bullet defect or bullet damage in that cardboard.
Okay, now they base their angles of at least 2 angles. Let's back up. There were 2 angles taken from this particular one bullet hole. Why is that?
There were, I believe, the original crime scene agent gave a possibility of 2 angles.
That's hot.
Of the of the angle of impact in the cardboard.
Okay, and what are some things that someone can determine from examining a bullet hole in this cardboard?
Well, the first thing is direction. It lets you know that you had one or at least one projectile fired from that direction. It's a pretty good indicator for direction.
Okay, what's another thing that you can determine?
Sometimes you can determine the angle of impact and whether that bullet was affected before it struck that object.
Mm-hmm.
And what I mean is, was it deflected by flesh, or did it hit its target, or is there an internal problem with the weapon that would cause that bullet to be off center?
Are you comfortable with the direction that was determined by Special Agent Worley in this particular photo?
I'm very confident of that direction.
Okay, the defense determined that there were 2 potential angles. How confident are you that the methodology used to determine those angles are accurate?
I have zero confidence from this piece of evidence as far as establishing angles.
So that's interesting. You feel good about the direction of the bullet going into the quail cage, but you have a concern about the angle, correct?
That is correct.
Do you have a concern about the angle?
The angle of impact, yes, sir, that is correct.
What are 2 things that could affect the angle of impact on a surface like this cardboard?
As I mentioned before, you could have, that bullet could have hit an object, which we don't know, or it could be an internal problem with the firearm that causes it. When you think about, if I could explain,
yes.
When you think about a quarterback throwing a football, they spin that football and it makes it stable in flight. Well, a projectile coming out of the muzzle of a firearm, a single projectile firearm, works the same way. You've got little lands and grooves in that barrel. And as that propellant pushes that projectile down the barrel, it twists. Now, there's different twists depending on the firearm, but that twist, called rifling, most commonly, that's what my grandfather called it, but it makes that bullet stable in flight. Anything that can throw that projectile off of battery, whether it be striking something or a firearm problem, maybe fouling too much lead in the barrel, those kind of things will make that bullet off center. Now, it still may go the general direction, but the rotation of that projectile could be off just a little bit when it strikes the target.
You know, the football.
So a good analogy.
Now, yeah, right. The football analogy was a really good analogy, actually.
Would be a lineman getting his hand on a football and making it go wobbly, but it keeps going, correct?
That would work. Yes, sir.
Over Fox.
I'll leave the witness.
Doug, could you zoom in on this hole real quick?
Zoom in, Doug.
Dr. Kinsey, I'd like to ask you to step down here, and for demonstrative purposes, I'd like you to demonstrate how an angle of impact can be affected in cardboard.
This is great. So now we're going to get a whole lot of that's what she said opportunities, guys, with sticking the dowel through the hole. Y'all ready?
Describe to the jury what you've done with this box.
This is great.
I placed 4 strategic holes in this box representing a bullet defect in cardboard. As you probably saw in the photographs, as a crime scene investigator, we use dowel rods to help determine direction and angle of impact. Now they can be as simple as a wooden dowel rod like you get at your hardware store, or they make some real complicated ones made out of fiberglass. If you can afford it, you know, most agencies and most crime scene teams will use a fiberglass rod, but the wooden rods, as long as they're pretty straight and true, they work just the same. So if this represents a projectile defect in cardboard, and may I say weathered cardboard, because this has been out there at least a year and a half since this incident took place, you place that dowel rod in that defect, and then you can get an approximate angle or angle of impact on it, but you can definitely get a more confident direction. If your shooter's over here and you shoot in this direction, or over here, or up or down. But it's not the end all be all. And I can explain that to you also.
Okay. So could you demonstrate how, well, back up a second, and step away so the jurors can see this photo, if you would. You saw the, I might need you up here.
Look at him. I love him so much.
Call and I will come.
You saw the defense expert's testimony, Mr. Sutton, I believe, last week, describing this hole. Can you explain to them how he determined the angle of impact based on what he was observing?
He's holding that box with a stick. It's great.
Please
oh,
do
wow.
What Mr. Sutton did with geometry and trigonometry and a whole lot of tools.
Where's
basically a protractor, as we used when I testified previously. If you had a confident bullet defect, you can run a string and then put a level or it's a type of protractor, it's a bullet angle finder on top of that rod, and you can get a general angle of impact in a fixed object. However, this isn't a fixed object.
He referred to that little mark around 3 o'clock. What did he call that?
I think he called it a bullet wash.
Could it be a bullet white?
Bullet white, yeah, something like. It's not a term I use.
Okay.
I'm familiar with it.
And what was he assuming that bullet white was caused by, based on the testimony you heard?
From the angle. He's assuming
the angle of what?
The angle of impact.
Okay. What else could cause that?
As we mentioned, striking the surface beforehand, fouling in the barrel, something internal. It just throws the bullet off course a little bit. It's not spinning the way it normally spins. So when it strikes, it doesn't strike. It doesn't enter the way it normally would. It wallers a little bit, like that football we talked about.
What about the dowel rod?
Well, the purpose of inserting the dowel rod is to try to get the best angle or the best direction you can. And in a perfect world, the angle would be fairly confident, like another bullet defect we're going to talk about. Remember, this is weathered cardboard. So once that examiner, and these rods are not caliber specific either, because a crime scene investigator or an examiner can't look at a bullet hole and guess what caliber it is. That's nonsense. So you try to pick the one that fits the hole the best. And with some of the fancy kits, you get a little shim kit with some little rubber grommets that you can place in there, make it fit a little bit better. But more typically, you just pick the dowel rod that's closest to the hole.
Could a dowel rod
you have to get the right
angle of impact?
You have to get the right size dowel rod to fit the hole, guys.
Upon me inserting this dowel rod, I can do damage to that bullet defect. But more importantly, when I remove it, I could do damage. And it's very deceptive damage. It's not intentional,
oh boy,
but it can damage the angle of impact, especially in a soft, unreliable object like cardboard.
You can return to the stand. Thank you.
I can illustrate that.
Please go ahead.
What I'm saying, once a crime scene investigator gets what they need, they get their photographs, their measurements, their direction. So now this dowel rod's here. And none of us know this unless you've got a video of the examiner taking that dowel rod out. So we don't know what direction he or she might have pulled that dowel rod out because she's got her measurement. She or he is not considering someone coming behind them and measuring again for something.
You're not considering someone else coming in behind them and trying to stick through the same hole.
Cardboard. And we're not talking about in wood or sheetrock, we're talking about cardboard. If you pull it to the right, you cause that same bullet white that we got in the photograph. Likewise, if I pull it to the left, now it looks like that projectile has entered from a left to right direction. And you can go on and up or down.
We got him.
That'll influence the appearance
Keep it on in there.
Of that bullet defect because you've got an object like cardboard, something that there's no confidence in.
Thank you. You can sit that down. So do you recall what the defense expert testified to the direction and angle of that particular angle of impact?
I do.
And what was it?
I think 1 and 3 degrees.
Do you remember, like, was it left,
Going
right,
up.
right to left?
Going up.
And from what way to what way? What direction to what direction?
Left to right, or right to left?
Right.
Yes, sir, right to left. I have to think about the quail pen in my head.
Are you confident that the direction was correct on this?
Yes, sir, I have no reason not to believe the direction. I mean, that would have to be a huge defect hole for it to throw the direction off.
How confident are you in the angle of this?
I have zero confidence in that angle of the bullet entry.
Doug, if you could go to page 21, which I believe is State's Exhibit, a picture of State's Exhibit 38. Can you describe for the jury what that is right there?
Like the first defect, this is also a defect in a wooden, it's been described as a doghouse.
Now, you can also determine the angle of impact and the direction here, correct?
I can.
What degree of certainty do you have that they were right in the
Have
angle?
you not seen that before? That's one of those they speak into it. They speak into it. I feel like I've seen it maybe in a handful of other trials, but yeah, they speak into it. It is funny looking though, isn't it? Yeah. I would so much prefer that though versus trying to type and keep up with it. You know what I mean? Because they all have their different systems, and from what I understand, even if in the same court, each stenographer is so specific in terms of their methods that if they've got their rough, whatever it is that they produce in shorthand, right, that another court stenographer could not come behind them and translate it basically. So it's pretty crazy. So they speak into it. I don't know how they do it. It's like code words or what. I wish we could hear it. Oh, okay.
And the directions in the doghouse.
Gotcha.
Place a
Okay.
lot more confidence in this angle because that wood is fixed. It'll show a much truer projection of the angle of impact.
That's crazy though that you've ever had it at all.
Can you hold on one second? How is this particular? I think you just described it, but real quick, how is the doghouse different from the quail cage in determining the angle of impact?
Well, the doghouse, if you look at it, is at least a ½ inch to 3/4 thick. So like I said, you've got a stable, dependable bullet defect. The cardboard is 2 pieces of brown paper with corrugated paper in between to cause, for strength purposes. But as I mentioned, not only is the cardboard, in my opinion, not a good substance to shoot into, it's also weathered. So that makes it even weaker.
Doug, can you go to page 42 on this exhibit?
Thank you, Doug.
All right, can you, it doesn't have an exhibit number at the top. This is page 42 on Defense Exhibit 40. Can you describe what this photo is?
Yes, sir. That is a computer animated drawing
Here we go.
of some potential trajectories into that quail pen.
And the 2 gray boys here.
Yes! Yes!
They are
They're the 2 gray boys.
They're 2 figures that were placed in that CAD presentation to represent shooters.
Go to 46, the same exhibit.
He's too polite to laugh, but he's trying not to laugh.
And describe what this is.
This is one animated suspect, I guess, or shooter placed in a similar CAD
Tell us.
drawing
Tell us.
photograph animation.
Okay, now go to page 49.
I'm dying. I think they do show us.
And what is? Sorry, go back to that's the picture I wanted. So there's 3 angles represented in this picture, correct?
There are 3 angles.
2 of them are from the same hole, correct?
Yes, sir.
One of them is from the doghouse, correct?
That is correct.
You believe that the doghouse angle is fairly reliable?
I do.
You question the quail house angle, correct?
I place no confidence in that angle from the quail pen.
Explain for the jury, and you observed the defense expert last week talking about this. How did they come to determine, based on these lines and where these gray figures are placed, how did they come to determine their heights were between 5'2" and 5'4"? We'll get to your opinions about that in a moment, but just explain for them how the defense expert got to that decision.
The defense expert said he tried plugging in different heights.
This is great.
And
this is great.
he had to place those animated figures on a plane, that laser line. And he determined that they go back and forth on that plane to achieve the defects that are documented by the original crime scene examiner.
Doug, go to page 51 real quick. Let's see if that's the
right.
So there's some yellow placards here on the ground. You see them?
I do.
And what do those yellow placards represent?
Cartridge cases that were found on the ground. They're markers. So, once you find the cartridge cases, you put them there for documentation purposes, photography, and sketching purposes.
And why explain to the jury what the defense has determined that their angle is based on the static lines, those green lines, correct?
That is correct. Back and
Oh
forth.
wait, I know we will see it again in this questioning, but you can see right behind Alan Jackson, you can see that computer screen has the exhibit that they're looking at with the two gray boys and the laser lines, which it's hilarious.
Forth on that one static line for one angle and one static line for the other angle.
And they place them right there at that particular location. Why?
I think the defense expert was taking into consideration the location of the cartridge cases, and he was showing how it would fit those 5'2" animated figures that he placed in that presentation.
Is it your understanding? Now I'll demonstrate.
There it is.
The gray figures are holding the firearm.
There it is. You can see it pretty well there. Yeah. The 5'2", 11-year-old assassins, they trained their whole lives for this
And
moment.
those gray lines represent like a stream. They would run up
all
and down.
11 years of their
Yes, sir.
life.
That was the testimony. You go back and forth on this green line.
Okay. And they would be right here because this is where the shell casings are. The shell casings are ejecting, correct?
That is how I understood his.
What?
Restate the question.
I'll restate the question. Why would they be placed right there in that particular
Well,
location along that static
the
green
best
line?
part was that was from the first defense expert, and then the second one came in and took it to the next level, which is that for the feed room, they must have been hiding in the ceiling. They were hiding in the ceiling, and that they must have been wearing goggles, which is how the brains didn't like impede their vision. So they were wearing goggles. They're hiding in the ceiling. Then they jump down from the ceiling, and then they come out. Oh God, it's too much. It was so great.
Because they were in proximity to some of the shell casings.
Okay. Can you explain for this jury why their assumptions
Green lasers
on the math they did are incorrect in determining that the shooter had to be between 5'2" and 5'4"?
Well, there's a bunch of variables. Variables do matter.
Excellent.
There are a bunch that you would have to consider. First, you'd have to consider this to be a static crime scene. Very little movement, and when it is movement, it's controlled movement. Second, you would have to place some confidence in that angle of impact on that cardboard. Third, as I testified in my previous testimony, we're not able to test fire or with confidence what we know to be the weapon used in this situation with the same ammo. And they don't throw the ammo the same place every time. It may be in the general vicinity, but as I said, I believe in my previous testimony, if you knew exactly where it was going to throw that cartridge case, you could carry a bucket with you and sit that bucket, and all your cartridge cases would go in the bucket. But like we see in the sketch and in the animated drawing, those cartridge cases are throughout. They're in a pretty large little area. And what I also saw that I noticed from this CAD drawing is this cartridge case is to the left of these animated shooters, which means that sometime at least two of these shots were fired with the shooter far to the left and not on this static green line.
Could you come down here real quick and point out what you're talking about as it relates to the location of the shell casing?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to pull something up for you guys
I'm
too.
not sure if this is a shell casing here, Mr. Wilson, but right here, that is a shell casing, and it would not eject this direction in any situation depicted here in the presentation. It's not a left-handed, nobody's ever testified it was a left-handed AR-15, and like I said, they're kind of uncommon, and if it is, and that's a left-handed, then we couldn't explain the majority of them being to the right. So that's what makes this static line flawed.
Thank you.
In another photograph, you can actually see a larger area of cartridge cases back here.
I'm going to pull something up here. So, you know, because they never found the weapons, right? And they never found, you know, the clothes that he was wearing. So I'm going to pull this up for any of you guys who may not have seen it. Come on. Okay, don't play yet. Okay, here we go. So this is what I made when I was covering this trial, gavel to gavel. So check it out. Here we go.
That I own with a bunch of other people that nobody else would pay, and so I've been paying for it. And he did some work up there digging some ditches. Right?
Cousin Eddie digging ditches.
When did he do that? He started within the last couple of months.
So after the homicides, Cousin Eddie is up on this piece of property digging ditches.
And that property, where's it at in Eugene? It's off of United Road, United Drive.
Okay.
I think it's called Redbeard and 0 United Drive.
I get goosebumps every time at that part. Here we go. Wait for it. So that X is where, that's the address right there. Okay. This is the street view. Wait for it. There you go. That freaking tractor is still there. Like, you know what I mean? So that's interesting. Okay, so now we'll go back to where we were. Okay. Thank you.
Let's assume for a minute that the angles are correct. And they very well could be, correct?
They could be.
Why is the defense's theory as to the height of the shooter represented in this picture
Dumb.
still wrong? What else would affect it?
Awful.
Distance and height.
Would you like to take a moment to demonstrate for the jury what you're talking about?
Weapon position. Yes, sir. Will you tell me which angle you'd like me to demonstrate first?
Let me ask you this question before you step down. Can a person be on their knee and get the same angle and be standing and get the same angle?
Yes, sir.
Can a 6'4" person and a 5'4" person still shoot the same angle, just at different distances?
Absolutely.
Can you demonstrate for the jury why that is one way that this could have changed their math?
I can.
Please.
Yay. Alex has got them shark eyes.
I measured this depth on the witness box during a break. It's 8 inches. I used to be 5'11", but as I get older, I'm about 5'10". But if I'm here, or I could be 5'8" or 5'2",
5'8".
or 5'4".
For all you guys
Here I'm 5'10".
about that.
Here I'm 6'6", and here I'm even over 7 foot, and I've still got the same angle. I have just added a little bit of distance to it. And as far as the quail pin angle, I'm 21 inches from the floor to my knee. I measured it. I believe it was testified that the defendant is 25 inches between the floor and his knee. So there's 4.5 to 5 inches difference in our heights. Here, I'm probably at 4'10" if I'm shouldering this weapon. And I don't know the mechanics or how it got this way. I'm just saying it's possible. Here, I'm at 39, 38 and some change, or I can even take it lower or higher. And please don't ask me to demonstrate that twice, but I don't think my knee is again.
I think I heard him crack.
Yeah, but that takes me to 36 inches, 37 inches. With the defendant, it would be about 39. So it's definitely possible. Even from a shoulder weapon, it's possible. And we do not know how the weapon was being held.
Excellent.
From what you've observed in this crime scene, was Maggie moving at the time she was shot?
This was a very dynamic crime scene. I believe everything was moving. The victims and the suspect were moving.
And how do you know that?
Well, suspect would be the different firearms evidence, the cartridge cases. Like I said, there's no absolute. They're not going to throw them the exact same spot, but they will throw them in a similar direction. We've got cartridge cases in a pretty nice sized perimeter. We've got them at different locations from where Miss Maggie Murdaugh's body, the final resting place, and different angles and different positions in different directions. So that tells you it's very fluid and it's very dynamic.
So if I'm holding a gun and I'm moving and shooting, what is happening with those shell cases as I move?
They are moving as they're ejected.
Where was Maggie's head pointing when she hit the ground?
Miss Maggie Murdaugh's head was pointed in the direction of Paul Murdaugh, where his body rested,
So sad.
back toward the feed room.
So sad.
What is your opinion?
I mean, just think about that. I mean, it's just the last thing that Maggie saw before she died was she saw Alex shoot their son. It's just
Of the defense's expert that says the shooter could not have been 6 feet 4 inches tall like the defendant, Alex Murdaugh.
I think that's a flawed opinion.
Could it have been a 6'4" person?
It could have been a 5'4", 6'4", or in my opinion, a 7'4", as I just demonstrated.
excellent. He's we had an NBA basketball star.
Doug, let's go to page 59 in the defense exhibit 140. That should reflect state's exhibit 57. Dr. Kinsey, can you describe that picture for the jury?
Yes, sir, I can. That is a shot from inside the feed room, that back window pane where the buckshot exited Paul's left arm and then continued and exited the feed room.
Please go to page 67. Should be States 45, I believe. And what is that right there?
That's a pink string from the window to a pine tree.
And then go to page 69. And what is that a picture of?
I don't know if it's the same pink string, but it's also a pink string coming out of a window.
And go to page 74.
Okay, so I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because this part is some of the things that the defense offered were just so dumb, but like it's part of their job, right? On rebuttal to rebut them. And it's just like, you know, at least with the two gray boys, it's funny, right? But with the pink string, it's just like stupid. And the cross on this is really funny too, because Poot gets really confused about how to call what the name of the quail pen, and it's really fucking funny. Spinny wheel, spinny wheel. YouTube having a moment. I've seen this happen for other people as well. So YouTube has these like phases where it's like you'll see many people be getting the spinny wheels, and then it'll have like its good moments. So, you know. Wow, this is an extended one though, I would say. Which is funny because you can see that it's loading the closed captioning. So like, what the fuck? I try to pause it, doesn't do anything. Do 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 do. Well, I wonder when Top Cat was asking earlier, I wonder when we will get the witness list, because this will be exciting to see if Kenny Kinsey will testify. It'll be an amazing juxtaposition seeing him in that courtroom, if so. And again, if he doesn't, it means that whatever he produced with his opinion, the state chose not to use it, you know, apart from citing that one portion during the hearing that did align with what they wanted to say with their theory. Oh my God, this is insane. What is going on? Okay, give me a second. Let me try refreshing this. Oh, and of course now it works. That is hilarious. Okay. Hold on. I just like unshared it and now it's working. So, okay. Okay.
Contact wound to the head by a shotgun?
Yes, sir, I have.
How many times have you observed a contact wound to the head by a shotgun?
This is awful and very depressing. Let me skip ahead a little bit. Come on, YouTube, please. Maybe I need to unshare, reshare again because I don't know why. Maybe that's a StreamYard thing too. Yep. Weird. Very weird.
It'd be nice if we could open this door. I want to make sure that there's security here, but if we could have that door open just for a minute or two.
This is great.
Thank you, Your Honor.
And then the defense, of course, has to do their own version of this.
I'm grabbing what Smart the State's Exhibit 4, which is a camo, Benelli, Super Black Eagle 3 shotgun.
Oh, you know, I was referencing this earlier, so I bet it is on this part where Poot does the thing where he points it at the prosecution. Okay.
We'll use this for the demonstration, so step down.
There we go. Shotgun. Checking to make sure it's unloaded, as one should always
Now,
do.
is this door the same width as the feed room door?
It's a couple inches wider than the feed room door.
And of course, the feed room door doesn't have this, this inset, correct?
That is correct.
So this is not exactly a replication of what happened at the feed room door, correct?
No, sir, it's not.
The door swings the same direction though.
Now, you have given me permission. I'm very careful about muzzle velocity. Muzzle awareness, but you've given me permission to point to see you, correct?
I have.
Okay. You actually asked me to, correct?
Yes, sir, I did.
All right. So go in there and stand a couple of feet back. It doesn't have to be 5 feet, but you have since testified that Paul was 5 feet inside the feed room, correct?
Can we demonstrate the first shot out here?
I am.
believe they am.
All right, stand back a little bit because you got to
Okay.
stumble toward me.
Yes, sir.
So I'm going to point like I'm pointing at you.
Yes, sir.
Paul is shot. Where's the shooter approximately outside the door?
The reach phase from the ejection port of the shotgun is just past the door frame.
Okay, Paul has just been shot.
Yes, sir.
And then in the defense's theory, you tell me what to do, and you act this out, and I'm gonna do what you tell me to do based on the defense's theory of the case.
The defense agreed with the assessment that Paul stood there for a moment, bleeding down his injured left arm, and he slowly walked toward the door.
Okay, and what does the shooter do?
The shooter's coming in the door.
And then what does the shooter do?
He shoots Paul in the back of the head after he passes him.
Okay, and then shoots Paul in the back of the head like this, and where does the blood spatter go?
The blood spatter, the pellet defects, and one that I didn't know about that the expert collected was in the door frame at the top of the door.
Now I understand this is a little different than the feed room door. That's the best we can do. So what did you find odd about the theory, first of all?
I think the theory is preposterous, in
Yes.
my opinion.
Can you walk me through why you think it's preposterous?
Absolutely. Number one, that dry lock number 2 shot shell fires a projectile at 1,450 feet per second once it leaves the muzzle of that weapon. As was mentioned, that's a millisecond. That's fast. To think that the pressure from flesh and bone will cause that pellet, those steel pellets now, we're not talking about lead. Lead's a little bit more giving. Lead is malleable. It will crush or flatten. We're talking about steel, BB pellets. They will turn around because of the pressure, go back the opposite direction,
Oh boy.
180-degree direction at enough velocity to dent a steel exterior door and embed in the door frame. That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen, in my opinion.
I don't know if you mentioned this earlier, but can you talk about, try to get it right.
And can I add?
Please do.
Also, there's no defects to the OSB or the T111 siding in the bottom of the room.
All right, wait a second. You said a lot right there.
Yes, sir.
TS what?
TS111. It's like a exterior paneling that people put on their buildings. That's what's on the building.
For all the city boys, we appreciate you describing that. Thank you.
Yes, sir. It's a whole weather paneling. There's no defects at the bottom. And if that theory is correct, if this is an entrance and this is an exit, the shot still had to go somewhere. There's no.
Again, this is like it's disputing a really dumb theory. So let me go ahead a little bit. I think this is right at the end of his direct. Okay, this is stupid. Let me unshare, reshare.
Fast that shell is propelled out of that barrel, and I know that it can't turn around 180 degrees and go back the other direction. It's not like blood and tissue. We're talking about steel pellets.
Dr. Kinsey, are there studies on percentages of blowback when you're shooting into someone?
There are.
And based on your expert opinion, what percentage of blowback
Hold
would come
that.
back at a shooter if they were able to shoot at that angle?
Well, I don't think there's any definite, but what I read is 8 to 10%, except in, like I said, it's not an absolute every time, but 8 to 10%. Remember, most of your force is going out the front of the barrel.
And a moment ago, you were just talking about the defects and all of the trauma that would have happened to the paneling and the floor. Can you point on this photo with the dowel stick behind you for the jury? I just want them to see in this photo.
Right here. The void, as I documented in my original testimony, the void was from here down, other than one stray satellite drop of blood. That was fairly clean. From here to at least right here. But there's no defects here. There's no defects in that cement outside. There's no defects in the inside cement and none in this OSB right here. And that was still there when I did the tour. They ripped out all the shelving and some of the insulation, but this was still there.
Dr. Kinsey, you may have covered this a little bit, but explain for the jury, if someone is shooting down, as we just demonstrated a moment ago here in the doorway, you're leaning out, the shooter is shooting down. How do pellets get embedded into the door frame up here? How is that possible?
I think it's impossible.
It's not possible. Yep.
Physics don't work that way unless you're shooting into a trampoline or
Love
huge
it.
piece of steel, and then
Love
you may have
it.
a pellet deflected back on you. It happens many times, especially when
I
we're shooting
mean,
steel targets.
Shooting
But
into a
not
trampoline would go along with the rest of the defense theory.
that velocity. It will not sink into the door frame, and it definitely will not dent that door with what I documented, in my opinion.
Emergency. Classic.
What is restate for this jury what the defense's theory based on that blowback that would have exploded into the shooter's face here behind Paul? Explain for this jury what the defense's theory is about how that shooter would have been injured.
The defense expert testified that that shooter would be most probably incapacitated from blood, bone, and body fluid, and it was a high likelihood that he was injured by those pellets.
That's why they had to have goggles.
Dr. Kinsey, in your expert opinion, is there anything awkward about a shooter standing outside going into an enclosed area to turn around and shoot someone from enclosed? Is there something weird about that to you?
I can't figure out the methodology of a shooter. I've never done any crime like that, Mr. Wilson, but I don't see, if we talk about common sense and everybody's mentioned the totality when they don't have an answer for something, it's always, I looked at the totality, but I don't see any reason for someone to squeeze up past one victim in his doorway to go inside to shoot him back out. And if he did, if that scenario did happen, that doesn't explain all the pellets that are in the floor of the feed room that we've heard testimony to as to why law enforcement didn't clean those pellets up. If it happened the way the defense expert says, those pellets would be out here in the yard, they would not be inside that feed room.
Dr. Kinsey, you have a chance to review the case file on this particular case and observe the defense testimony from last week?
It's two separate things. Yes, sir. I have reviewed our case file. All crime scene, or what I felt was crime scene related evidence. I didn't look into the videos and a lot of that other stuff. And I have witnessed the testimony of the defense experts.
Are you familiar with what the investigation has determined about the tool marks found on the 300 blackout shells found around Maggie's body and the tool marks found on the weathered 300 blackout shells found way up by the house in the flower bed? Are you familiar with that?
I am familiar.
And what do you know about that?
The examination.
Of our case, it's going into completely new information. Their ballistic experts already testified. We didn't present a ballistic expert, and now they're parading him as a ballistic expert.
Your response?
Your Honor, their expert said yesterday, about an hour and 9 minutes into their testimony, that it would be impractical for one shooter to bring in two long guns.
Oh, wow.
This has always been the state's theory that the shooter owned both guns and had them on him. So we're rebutting what the defense expert said.
That is, listen to how he just had that ready to go at about an hour and 9 minutes in. Holy mackerel. Like he was expecting that objection. Incredible. Right. That's funny. Hello.
Please answer the question. Dr. Kinsey.
Twizzle.
Are you familiar with what the investigation has determined about the 300 blackout shells found around Maggie's body and the 300 blackout shells found up by the flower bed that were appear to be several months old and weathered? What relationship do the shells have to each other?
According to the firearms examination, those cartridge casings were loaded and ejected from the same weapon.
So a family-owned weapon.
Family-owned weapon.
To kill Maggie.
Leading.
What do you infer from that information?
I would infer that this is a family-owned firearm.
There was some testimony yesterday, Dr. Kinsey, about, well, it was from the defendant's brother, Mr. John Marvin Murdaugh. And it related to the following day, he came upon the crime scene. It had been cleared, and he saw how the crime scene was left.
Oh.
Can you explain? You've been in law enforcement for how many years?
This is important. So one of the things, y'all, this is really interesting, right? So, you know, when you've got these horrible crime scenes, right? Like in this case where there's like brains all over the place, you know, law enforcement doesn't clean that up, right? After they finish doing their thing. They leave it like that, right? And so it's a horrible, horrible thing for, you know, friends or family members or whatever to then come back to wherever, you know, and then they are like, that's what they have, right? And so that had come out with John Marvin, Alex's brother, who was very emotional, understandably so, because he was really close to Paul, and John Marvin and also Mark Ball explaining how what it was like for them to feel like they had to, the best they could do to try to take care of Paul would be for them to themselves clean up the brain matter and whatnot, right? And it's awful, right? And so this is real. I'm really glad he followed up with this to tell the jury, because the jury wouldn't know, right? That unfortunately, law enforcement doesn't do that. So There you go.
30 years. Well, over 30, but 30 years getting paid.
And you're the chief deputy at a sheriff's department?
Yes, sir. Orangeburg County Sheriff's Office.
Just to clarify some things, can you explain normally or traditionally how crime scenes are cleaned up for this jury? Is it the responsibility of law enforcement, in other words?
No, sir. There are private companies that are contracted through SOVA. Well, it used to be SOVA. The name's changed now, and I'm sorry.
What does SOVA stand for?
It's Victims
State.
It's a state office of victims assistance, but it's now changed. I can't tell you what the new acronym is, but it works through our victims advocates, law enforcement victims advocates. Almost every department has them, and there's funding provided from taxpayer funds to work through your victims advocates, and you go out and you clean these crime scenes for the family so they don't bear the burden of cleaning those crime scenes. Law enforcement in particular cannot collect and dispose of and transport body parts or body fluids. That's something the coroner has to do because it's actually by permit through DHEC.
There you go.
But to make it easy on the family, these companies can collect those items and then they will turn them over with a chain of custody, or they will properly dispose of those items.
There you go. There you go.
Dr. Kinsey, is it your expert opinion that
John Marvin and Mark Ball, they didn't, I'm sure they didn't know. Right. But yeah, again, explaining it for the jury that, because you have to have the permit, because technically it's the property of the coroner's office. That was good information.
a 6'4" shooter cannot be excluded from the murder of Maggie and Paul?
I see nothing that could exclude a 6'4" shooter.
In your expert opinion, can you tell this jury, is it right for the defense to say that there had to be 2 shooters based on the testimony you heard yesterday? In your expert opinion, can you exclude 2 shooters?
I cannot include or exclude 2 shooters.
Can the defense include, to the exclusion of all other possibilities, 2 shooters?
Absolutely not.
Beg the court's indulgence. Love that.
Please answer any questions the defense has for you.
All right. And Mr. Griffin this time, not Poot. Excellent. Mr. Griffin. I thought it was Poot again.
Good afternoon, Dr. Kinsey.
Hey, Mr. Griffin.
Anyone who has a doctorate degree, I want to call doctor. It's all right if I call you doctor?
I'll answer anything you call me, Mr. Griffin.
I understand.
appreciate that.
But now, your degree, though, is in criminal justice. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yes, sir.
You're not a doctor of pathology?
Absolutely not.
And you have no medical training?
Interesting, right? Well, there you go. Holy fuck. Right there. Right there. There it is. I mean, so again, just in terms of what is this going to mean, the implications for Karen Reed, right? So
I have training in pathology of gunshot wounds. Yes, sir. I've attended several courses, classes, and seminars. It was also included in the criteria for the certifications I mentioned for the International Association for Identification. I've also conducted extensive research on police officer use of force cases and the injuries that result from therein.
Your doctorate is in criminal justice, and I believe your dissertation research is in use of force and perceptions of public attitude held by police
the
trainers.
specific phrasing that was used as it pertains to Massachusetts was that they have to be a medical doctor in order to opine onto the causation of an injury.
That is correct.
What was that?
Well, with the current atmosphere or what's been going on in the last 5 or 6 years in our country, I was just trying to help. I wanted to figure out something that would assist with, because we've seen some law enforcement officers do some terrible things on video. We've also, we've got a segment of our society, the minority segment of our population. A lot of those citizens are in fear of law enforcement. And I wanted to study if the media perception as held by the 3 types of law enforcement trainers, if the media perception and the way they portray law enforcement, if that affected the way we train our officers, if we're too hypervigilant, or if we tell them, look, there's death waiting for you around every corner. Is that going to make law enforcement more prone to use force or use less force or those kind of criteria? And that's what I was interested in. I was laying the groundwork of a scientific quantitative study to allow someone to come behind me and do some further research just to expand that topic.
Right. But you said you also have done some gunshot wound training as part of some certification?
Yes, sir. The IAI, as I mentioned, I was formally certified 2 different times. I think it's a 5-year certification. And I did let it lapse in 2015 because that's when I started my PhD and I couldn't study for both. But that is an extensive process where you do research and you have to do a written test. And then with my proficiencies throughout SLED, and then I still do some with our sheriff's office now where you have to pass proficiency, and that is practical examinations, testing, and that kind of thing.
Okay. Now, in this case, that the state did have a pathologist, Dr. Reamer, correct?
Yes, sir, they did.
And you reviewed her autopsy report as part of your work, correct?
Not so much as reviewed her report, but I went and spoke with her in Charleston at her office.
Well, did you review her report?
I have access to her report, Ms. Griffin. I can't tell you I looked through the whole report.
And you understood that her opinion was it was a shoulder shot through the.
So they're not going to get anywhere with this. I mean, anyway, so I think we've learned a lot. Like, obviously, he's amazing. For anyone who didn't watch this trial the first time or any time previously, he's awesome, of course. But that, even if, for example, right, like if he, as being not that he's not a medical doctor and, so he can't opine, as to the causation of injuries, there's still plenty of things that he could testify to. And again, as an accident reconstruction specialist. And some of the things we talked about too throughout the course of this was like things like dealing with the glass, right? Glass, the plastic of the tail light, right? The mechanics in terms of the car, the tire tracks, the potential like order of injuries, again, not the causation, but like the potential order of injuries. And another thing that came up too, like the whole thing about the cell phone falling and being underneath John O'Keefe. He could also testify on to, opine potentially as to that. And just the order of events, like literally what you guys saw, right? Was you saw him look at a crime scene and like literally figure out like, here's what happened and putting recreating it for you, like literally, right? To where you can picture exactly the order of events. And of course, he's just absolutely the most credible witness, so and again, just to reiterate, like if he's not called, right, then it means that there were no findings that he had when he was consulted by the Commonwealth. There were no findings that they wanted to, in other words, didn't agree with their theory, right? And in that case, again, will they find somebody else? We shall see. But again, I will say, I hope that he does testify because we will learn a lot more about what happened. And again, it could be that some of it could go either way. It could be, we see that a lot with experts where sometimes there's testimony that could be good for either side. But the thing about Kenny Kinsey is we know that whatever testimony he provides is going to be really, what's the right word? Credible, just really credible, right? Like he's, a great example too from earlier was when he was like, here, I'll present to you, like, here's this picture of the tire and here's this picture of like the mark and the tread. And I'm not going to tell you what I think it looks like. I'm going to let you guys look at it and come to your own conclusions, right? Which is awesome. So he's a great witness and he would help a lot, I think, for understanding. So, but there he is. So that's why, again, the worlds colliding, right? When they said Kenny Kinsey, and yes. And that's why we're watching this. Yeah. Because like last night, when I was doing the timestamps, because initially I was going to be doing Katie Magbanow's proffers tonight. But then when I was doing the timestamps from the Daubert hearing, I was like, oh my God, we should, light bulb moment. Like, what better thing to do than watch Kenny Kinsey? Because we just heard all of the standards, right? And all of the argument from the Daubert hearing. And again, the thing that was so especially relevant too was the part about like it has to be a medical doctor. That was what Judge Bev had said before, right? It has to be a medical doctor to opine on the causation of injuries. But we heard Hank Brennan drop Kenny Kinsey's name, right? And quote him and say, did you know this opinion? Blah, blah. So this is Kenny Kinsey. And it'll be really interesting too to see what it's like for him to testify in that court, right? Because people that aren't used to this accent are gonna be like, and also again, just like his personality, right? So likable and everything. I did. Yes, I did. I literally did. I literally yes, that or my reaction. I really did. I probably wasn't sitting, but whatever I was doing, I said, I lost it. I was like, what the fuck? Are you kidding me? Like, again, it's like the world's colliding. I was like, you've got like, wow, right? But he's like the best of the best, right? So, but crazy, right? I mean, he was the star of this trial. He was literally the star of this trial. And he's just such a likable, great, he's just awesome, as you guys saw. So, so he would the Commonwealth is who would be calling him Commonwealth. And again, the thing about him, right, is he's not going to provide an opinion based on what they want, right? That was why I wanted to watch this, because and for anyone who joined in later too, if you watch on replay, I'll have everything timestamped, but you really hear, right, just how unbiased and objective he is, and like just the ethics behind what he does, and just what makes him so credible is that like he's not going to be, you can't get him to say an opinion just because you know. So he's going to look at it objectively, and here's my findings, here's what it is. And that's why even if he's called by the Commonwealth, for me, it's like, it's going to help whatever it is, we're going to learn about what happened, right, in a way that is really informative. And then, but again, if they don't use him, it's because he didn't find anything that, because they can always say, we're not going to use you, right? Because if it doesn't support their theory, then they won't use him. So I don't know who Trev is, but I think y'all referenced him like last night. I don't know what Trev. I don't know, but it's funny that so many of you guys all have a history, which is awesome. So was Trev also involved in the 12-hour drunken live stream that lives in infamy? That's right. Thank you, Top Cat. He doesn't claim to know things if he doesn't know them. Yep, absolutely. Yep. He's very humble. He's very honest. He also explains things really well. So I can't wait to see what'll happen. Yeah. If that's okay, you don't have to be sorry. That's all right. It's all right. Twizzle Stick says he can lift weights. I guess this Trev dude, assuming it's dude, is perhaps not the strongest. I don't know. Yeah, I'm following Kenny Kinsey, and I don't know about Trev, and I'm not going to claim to know about Trev. So yes, very relatable to a jury. Absolutely. Yeah. And especially in that area, right? I mean, that's why I think it'll be interesting, because I don't know how this, again, he's so personable, right? But like, I just don't know how people that live in that area, like in Canton, like how are they just going to be so confused, or like, I don't know, but like, it's just a different, sensibility, if you will. Right. And just so laid back. He's just so laid back and so personable. So yeah. So yeah, but that's it for this one. So there's Kenny Kinsey. We will keep an eye out to see what happens with that. But yeah, and we've got plenty else of other stuff going on for this week. And hopefully the new BK documents will post on the docket tomorrow. If so, I will, of course, prioritize that as always. And we will also follow up on all the discussion about the dad trash, because I still have that case law we need to go over. And I have some other things as well, too, that I wanted to follow back on. So so we will make sure to do that. But y'all, thanks for being here as always. Love y'all, especially shout out to all the new Scroll friends and all the old Scroll friends. Shout out to all the Scroll friends in general, because y'all are the best. Y'all make this fun for everybody. And so love you guys, and I'll see you guys next time.